There is a house on Evergreen Terrace. It is painted a faded shade of white, or maybe it was always that color. It is hard to tell. The paint has not peeled exactly, it has simply settled into itself over time, the way old houses do, the way old things do when nobody comes to restore them. There is a beat-up car in the driveway. There is a cracked piece of sidewalk out front that nobody has ever fixed. There is a TV flickering in the front window, casting a pale blue light through the curtains in the evenings. And inside, sinking into a couch that has absorbed 36 years of the same weight in the same spot, sits Homer Simpson. He is holding a can of beer. He is watching something he will not remember by morning. He is perfectly, completely content. And that contentment, that soft animal stillness he settles into when the evening gets quiet and the kids are down and the house smells like whatever Marge made for dinner, is both the most human thing about him and the most heartbreaking. Because Homer Simpson is content with a life he was never supposed to understand. He is comfortable inside a fog that was created for him before he was old enough to know what clarity felt like. And when you start pulling at the edges of who Homer really is, when you sit quietly with his story the way he sits quietly with his television, what you find underneath is not a buffoon. What you find is a man who was shaped, deliberately and systematically, into exactly the version of himself that would be easiest for other people to manage. Let us go slowly. There is no rush here. The night is long and Springfield is not going anywhere. Homer J. Simpson was born sometime in the late 1950s, though the show has never been fully committed to a specific year. He grew up in Springfield, in a house with a father who was emotionally remote by nature and catastrophically absent by circumstance, and a mother who was not dead, though he spent the first 3 decades of his life believing she was. For now, what matters is the shape of the absence she left behind. When Homer was very young, his mother kissed him while he slept and walked out of his life. She had reasons. The reasons were real, and they were forced on her by circumstances that were not her fault. But Homer did not know that. Homer was not told anything except that she was gone, and then, eventually, that she was dead. He grew up in a house with Abe Simpson, a man who loved him in the way that men of that generation were taught to love their children, which is to say, mostly by staying present, and mostly by not saying anything about anything that actually mattered. There is a particular kind of wound that comes from being a child who is told that the person who loved them most simply ceased to exist. It is not a loud wound. It does not announce itself. It lives quietly in the body, in the way the chest tightens when someone talks about their mother without warning, in the way a person learns to not need things so that they are never disappointed when the things they need fail to arrive. Homer carried this wound forward into every relationship he ever formed, and it shaped him in ways he could never have named because naming a wound requires understanding where it came from, and Homer was never given that understanding. What Homer was given instead was a story. His mother died. That was the story. Abe maintained it for over 2 decades. He showed Homer a gravestone, which was not Mona's gravestone, but the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet. Though Homer would not have known the difference, and Abe was counting on that. It is a strange kind of cruelty, the kind that wraps itself in protection. Abe was trying to spare his son the more complicated truth, which was that Mona Simpson was alive, was wanted by federal authorities, and could never come home because a man named Charles Montgomery Burns had seen her face during an activist raid on his biological weapons facility and had used the full weight of his considerable resources to ensure she could not return. To her family, the full arc of that story will be followed in its own time. What matters here is simply the effect it had on Homer. The effect was this. Homer Simpson grew up believing, at the deepest and most unexamined level of himself, that he was the kind of person people left. He never said this out loud. He would not have been able to articulate it even if pressed. But the belief lived in him the way old beliefs do, below language, below thought, in the body itself. He was the kind of person people left. His mother left. His father, while physically present, was emotionally somewhere else entirely. The people who were supposed to stay, the people who were supposed to look at him and choose him, tended not to. And so Homer learned, without being taught, to grip what he had with both hands, to be grateful, to not make demands, to be easy, to be someone who could be kept. This is the foundation of every decision Homer Simpson has ever made as an adult, and once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. Think about how Homer relates to his job. He works at the Springfield nuclear power plant, in Sector 7G, as a safety inspector. He has worked there for his entire adult life. The job is dangerous. The facility is catastrophically unsafe. The man who employs him, Mr. Burns, cannot remember his name despite decades of acquaintance, refers to him by incorrect names with cheerful indifference, and treats him with a contempt so casual it barely qualifies as contempt. It is simply the natural order of things, from Burns's perspective, that a person like Homer should be grateful for whatever he is given and should not aspire to anything further. Homer endures this. He endures it not because he is too stupid to notice, though the show would like you to believe that is the primary explanation. He endures it because leaving would mean risking the loss of something he cannot afford to lose. The job is stability. The paycheck is the house on Evergreen Terrace and the beer in the refrigerator, and the proof that he has built something that cannot be taken from him. If he challenges Burns, if he makes himself difficult, if he becomes the kind of employee who has opinions and expectations and standards, he might lose it. And losing it would mean being, again, the kind of person things are taken from. The show has explored this dynamic in scattered episodes across its run, usually for laughs, but the emotional truth underneath is consistent. Homer is not kept small by incompetence. Homer keeps himself small because small is safe. Small means you are not a target. Small means you do not ask for things you might not get. Now consider what happens to Homer's intelligence when the crayon is removed. This is one of the more extraordinary moments in the show's history, and it tends to get filed away as a quirky episode rather than the devastating character study it actually is. In the season 12 episode where Homer has the crayon removed from his brain, the change is immediate and comprehensive. He becomes, in the space of a few scenes, a genuinely different person. He speaks clearly. He reads complex material and retains it. He processes the world around him with a sharpness that is visibly startling to the people who know him. He writes a film critique that is so perceptive it closes a movie theater. He engages with Lisa's intellectual world in a way that moves her deeply, because she has spent her entire life trying to connect with a father who simply could not meet her where she was, and suddenly, he can. And he is miserable. This is the part that sits with you afterward. Homer, with his full intelligence restored, looks at his life and finds it unbearable. He sees the power plant for what it is. He sees the nature of his employment and the dynamic between himself and his employer, and he understands, with terrible clarity, that he has been tolerated and used in equal measure. He sees Springfield, and he sees what Springfield has done to its residents. He sees himself, and then he chooses to put the crayon back. He asks a friend to reinsert it. He returns the fog to himself deliberately, with full knowledge of what he is surrendering. And the show plays this as something bittersweet, maybe even quietly sad, but it does not fully reckon with what the choice reveals. Homer does not choose stupidity because intelligence is unpleasant. He chooses it because intelligence showed him a version of his life that was too painful to live with. And the fog was the only way back to the version he could bear. This is not a man who lacks the capacity for self-awareness. This is a man who has learned that self-awareness, in his particular life, in his particular town, leads somewhere he cannot survive going. The fog is not a condition imposed on him from outside, though the radiation and the crayons certainly contribute to it. The fog is also a choice. A daily, ongoing, unconscious choice to not look too hard at the machinery of his own suffering. There is a reading of Homer Simpson that makes him one of the saddest characters in the history of American television, and it has nothing to do with him being foolish or incompetent. It has to do with the fact that he is a man of genuine capacity who has been surrounded, from the earliest days of his life, by systems and people and circumstances that needed him to be less than he was. And he complied. He complied so thoroughly and for so long that the compliance became him. The ceiling he was given became the ceiling he believed in. Burns's role in this is worth examining carefully, because it is more deliberate than the show typically presents it. Burns knew Mona Simpson. He drove her underground. He pursued her for decades with a personal intensity that went well beyond any reasonable business concern. The woman had destroyed his biological weapons lab, which was an illegal facility to begin with, but Burns does not operate in the domain of legality and never has. What mattered to Burns was not the law. What mattered was the principle. Someone had come onto his property and destroyed his work and humiliated him, and she had done it successfully. Burns does not forget humiliation. But Burns is also a strategist, and the story of Homer Simpson's employment is not just a story about institutional cruelty or casual contempt. There is evidence, scattered across multiple episodes, that Homer's position at the plant is not accidental. The deal struck between Burns and Grandpa Abe is one layer of this. In exchange for Abe's silence about something Burns had done, Homer's employment was guaranteed regardless of his performance. He could not be fired. He would always have a place in Sector 7G. This guarantee was never explained to Homer, because explaining it would have required explaining everything else. So Homer went to work every day believing he kept his job through a combination of luck and the basic goodwill of an employer who did not know his name. There is something almost perfectly designed about this arrangement. From Burns's perspective, you take the son of the woman who most publicly defied you. You give him a job in your facility. You keep him there, guaranteed, through a deal made with his father. You pay him enough to make him dependent on the income, but not enough to ever make him comfortable. You subject him daily to the environmental contamination of your facility, which the evidence strongly suggests reduces cognitive function over time. And you have the son of your enemy, working in your building, slowly made incapable of understanding any of this, grateful every single day for the opportunity. It is elegant, in the way that only genuinely monstrous things can be elegant. Homer's relationship with his own body is another thread worth following here. The show has made Homer's physical resilience a running gag for 36 seasons. He falls off cliffs. He is struck by cars. He survives electrocutions, explosions, poisonings, and any number of scenarios that would end a normal person's existence inside the first act. He always recovers. He always comes back. And the audience laughs because it is a cartoon, and cartoon bodies do not obey the rules of real biology. But hold that explanation loosely for a moment and consider a different one. Homer has worked inside a nuclear facility, in close proximity to an active reactor, for his entire adult life. He grew up in a town whose water supply was contaminated by that same facility. He has been exposed to levels of radiation that no human body was designed to absorb. And his body, rather than being destroyed by this exposure, appears to have been altered by it in ways that make him, in certain respects, almost indestructible. His healing rate is absurd. His pain tolerance is genuinely inhuman. He absorbs punishment that should be fatal and walks away. The radiation theory would suggest that Homer's body has adapted to its environment in ways that are physically extraordinary while being cognitively catastrophic. The same contamination that makes him nearly impossible to kill may be precisely what keeps him from understanding why he should want to live differently. His body was hardened by the poison. His mind was softened by it. And the net result is a man who can survive anything except a clear view of his own life. Think about the moments where Homer is genuinely sharp, where the fog lifts briefly and something beneath it surfaces. These moments are not as rare as the show's overall presentation of him would suggest. Homer, in the right circumstances, displays an emotional intelligence that is striking. He understands people in the unguarded way that sometimes comes to people who were never properly educated in social performance. He reads rooms. He responds to grief and fear and loneliness in other people with a directness that occasionally lands with more accuracy than anything the more intellectually equipped characters around him manage. He loves Marge with a completeness that is, in its way, one of the most fully rendered things in the entire show. The love Homer has for his family is not simple. It is not the love of a man who does not understand complexity. It is the love of a man who has decided that this one thing, this one collection of people in this one house, is the thing he will not let be taken from him. It is fierce, and it is clumsy, and it periodically makes a wreck of the very thing it is trying to protect, because Homer does not have the emotional vocabulary or the unimpaired cognition to love quietly. But it is real. It may be the most real thing about him, which is, of course, the cruelest part of the coma theory. If the theory is true, if Homer has been unconscious since April 1993, then every episode since that date is the dream of a man who cannot get home. He is lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, connected to machines, losing brain function in increments while the world outside the room continues without him. And in the dream, he is always getting home by 6. He is always walking through the front door on Evergreen Terrace. He is always finding them there, Marge at the counter, the kids somewhere in the house making noise, the television already on. He is always arriving. The dream does not give him a better life than the one he had. It gives him the same life, exactly the same life, on repeat, because the same life is the one he wants. He is not dreaming of promotion or adventure or escape. He is dreaming of dinner on the table, and Bart's voice from upstairs, and Maggie's weight in his arms when she falls asleep against his chest. He is dreaming of the ordinary. That is the version of Homer that the show has been quietly encoding for 36 years beneath the falling and the burping and the strangling. A man of enormous, thwarted capacity, broken by systems he did not choose and could not see, sustained by a love so simple it barely has a name, dreaming endlessly of something he lost and cannot find his way back to. The house on Evergreen Terrace has a cracked piece of sidewalk out front. Nobody has ever fixed it. Homer probably drove over it that morning and did not notice. He has driven over it 10,000 mornings and never noticed. And Marge has looked at it probably and thought about calling someone and then thought about the cost and moved on to the 17 other things she was thinking about. The crack is just there, part of the landscape now, part of what home looks like. You fall asleep, and in Springfield the lights are still on. If you are watching this at 2 in the morning or falling asleep somewhere quiet, drop a comment telling us where you are and what time it is. It is always strange and lovely to remember how many people are somewhere in the world listening to the same thing in different rooms. And if you want more of this, subscribe. It genuinely helps, and there is a great deal more Springfield left to explore. There is a quality to the way Marge Simpson stands in the kitchen. She does not lean, she does not slump. She does not allow herself the small human luxury of letting her body announce its tiredness. She stands with a straightness that is not quite rigid, more like the way a tree stands, with a long habit of holding itself up in weather. She is usually doing something with her hands while she stands that way, stirring something, or wiping a surface that is already clean, or folding a dish towel into thirds and then unfolding it because the shape was not quite right. Her hands are always occupied. Her hands are always doing the work that keeps the house from feeling like it is falling apart. Marge Simpson is 34 years old. She has been 34 years old for 36 years, and in that fixed, impossible, amber-preserved version of her life, she has raised 3 children, maintained a marriage to a man whose capacity for self-destruction is essentially unlimited, held together a household that operates at the edge of financial stability in nearly every episode, pursued and abandoned and returned to various personal ambitions across hundreds of storylines, and done most of this without anyone in her immediate orbit fully registering how much effort it requires. She is the emotional infrastructure of the Simpson family. Not a metaphor, literal infrastructure, the kind that you only notice when it fails. The show has told Marge's story in layers, and the layers do not always fit neatly together. In some episodes, she is a woman of considerable quiet strength who knows exactly what she wants and has made deliberate choices to have it. In others, she is a woman who is very close to a version of herself she was never quite allowed to become. In still others, she is just a presence, patient and steady and slightly worried, providing the emotional backdrop against which Homer's disasters play out. The show has not always known what to do with Marge, and that uncertainty is itself revealing because it mirrors something true about the lives of women like her. Women who are so reliably present that the people around them sometimes forget to ask what it costs to always be there. Let us begin at the beginning, which, in Marge's case, requires going back further than her marriage. Marge Bouvier grew up as the middle child of a family with its own quiet weight. Her father was a strict man, not cruel exactly, but firm in the way that the men of his generation understood firmness, as a virtue, as something you provided your children as a service to their future selves. Her mother was a woman of anxiety and appearances, concerned with how things looked as much as how they were. Marge absorbed both of these influences and alchemized them into something that looked, from the outside, like composure. She became the child who did not cause trouble, who managed her own feelings so that they did not become other people's problems, who understood, very early, that the smoothest path through a complicated family was to be the one who held it together. She met Homer Simpson in high school. The show has told this story several times, in several different registers, with the specific details shifting as the floating timeline demands, but the emotional core of it has remained consistent. Marge was the girl with the impossible blue hair and the grades and the sense that her life was going to go somewhere, and Homer was the boy who was loud and careless and genuinely delighted by her in a way that nobody else had been. He did not treat her like a thing to be impressed by. He treated her like a person he wanted to be near. There is a version of that which is charming, and a version of that which becomes its own kind of trap. And Marge has spent her marriage navigating the space between those two versions. She loved him. That has never been the question. The question the show keeps returning to, across its best episodes, is what that love has required of her over time. Think about the episode where Marge develops a gambling addiction, or the one where she becomes obsessed with a pretzel franchise, or the ones where she takes up painting, or bowling, or police work, or acting, or bodybuilding. Each of these episodes tells a version of the same story. Marge discovers something outside the house that gives her a sense of self that the house alone cannot provide. She becomes, briefly, someone in her own right, not as Homer's wife or the children's mother, but as a person with a particular talent or interest or need. And then, in almost every case, the outside thing is taken away from her, or becomes too complicated to maintain, or quietly slips back below the surface as the demands of the household reassert themselves. The show presents this as the natural rhythm of Marge's character, and there is something honest about that presentation. But it also never quite reckons with what it means that the rhythm repeats. That the same cycle, discovery, expansion, contraction, return, plays out again and again without any lasting change in the fundamental conditions of Marge's life. Each episode resets, each personal breakthrough dissolves by the next Sunday night, and Marge goes back to the kitchen, and the dish towel, and the straight-spined standing, and the hands that are always doing something. Her hair is its own subject. The blue tower that sits on top of Marge's head is one of the most recognizable visual signatures in American animation. It defies gravity. It defies physics. It maintains its shape through rain, through wind, through explosions and car crashes and every variety of domestic chaos. Nobody in Springfield comments on it. Nobody outside Springfield, when guest characters arrive, mentions it either. It is simply a fact of Marge, like her voice and her patience, accepted without examination. Under the radiation theory, Marge's hair is a mutation. The same contaminated water, the same irradiated air, the same environmental conditions that gave Homer his extraordinary physical resilience, and Maggie her extraordinary cognitive capacity, did something specific to Marge's biology. Something that expressed itself upward into that impossible blue column that she maintains without effort, because maintaining it does not require effort. It is simply what her hair does now. It has been doing it so long that she has forgotten, if she ever knew, that it was not always like this. There is something fitting about a mutation that goes straight up. Marge's tower of hair is her most visible characteristic, and it reaches towards something above the room she is in. Above the kitchen, above the house, above Springfield. It points upward constantly, and Marge never gets to follow where it points. The show has given us direct access to Marge's interiority in ways that it does not always grant its other characters. She has a low, thoughtful voice that is easy to mistake for calmness, but is actually something closer to deliberateness, the voice of someone who has learned to think before she speaks. Because the cost of speaking without thinking is, in her experience, always paid by her. She worries in a specific, systematic way. She makes lists. She rehearses conversations before she has them. She anticipates problems and quietly addresses them before anyone else in the house notices the problem existed. This is not an anxiety disorder, though the show has occasionally flirted with suggesting it might be. It is a skill developed over years of being the person responsible for catching the things that fall. The things that fall in the Simpson house fall constantly. Homer's judgment is unreliable at best and catastrophic at worst. Bart generates disorder as naturally as breathing. Lisa's emotional needs are real and large, and require a quality of attention that is not always available in a house with so many competing demands. Maggie cannot yet articulate what she needs, which means Marge must infer it. The house is a system that requires continuous maintenance, and Marge is the maintenance. What the show has been less willing to examine, until it does so in isolated bursts that it then retreats from, is what this costs her specifically. There is a scene from one of the show's earlier seasons where Marge is asked what she wants, what she genuinely wants, for herself, and she pauses for long enough before answering that the pause says more than the answer does. She is not someone who has not thought about this. She is someone who has thought about it and learned to set the thinking aside, because the gap between what she wants and what is available to her in her actual life is not a gap she has found a way to close, and acknowledging the gap too directly is more painful than simply returning to the dish towel. The painter's episode is instructive here. When Marge discovers she has genuine artistic talent, the discovery comes with a particular quality of feeling that the show captures before it moves on. It is not just pleasure, it is recognition. The feeling of finding something that was always there, that was waiting, that she did not know she had been missing because she had organized her life so completely around other people's versions of what she was for, that she had not left space to discover what she was for herself. And then the episode ends, and the next one begins. This is the weight of the floating timeline as it applies specifically to Marge. Because Marge has grown, in various episodes, she has learned things about herself. She has arrived at moments of genuine self-understanding that would, in a more straightforwardly realistic show, be permanent. They would change her. They would accumulate into a Marge who is different, who has moved, who has taken the things she learned about herself in one episode and carried it forward into the next. But the timeline floats, and so Marge resets with everything else. The insight dissolves. The painting goes into the basement. The bowling trophy gathers dust. The pretzel franchise was a very stressful time. She returns to the kitchen and the standing with the straight spine and the perpetual, careful management of a household that depends on her so completely that the dependency has become invisible, the way the foundation of a house is invisible because it is below everything and doing its job, and no one goes to look at it until something goes wrong. Marge's relationship with Homer is complex in the way that long marriages are complex, which is to say that it contains things that are genuinely beautiful and things that are genuinely difficult, and they are often the same things at different moments. Homer loves her with a fervor that is real. He also takes her for granted in ways that are habitual and largely unconsidered. He creates problems and trusts her to solve them. He indulges his own needs and appetites and counts on her patience as a renewable resource. He has, across many episodes, done things that in a different kind of marriage might have been unrecoverable. And Marge recovers. She returns to him. She chooses him again. The show has addressed this pattern most directly in the episodes where their marriage comes genuinely close to ending. These moments are rare enough that they carry real weight when they happen. Marge considering leaving. Marge alone in a hotel room writing in a journal about the accumulation of things she has absorbed. The show allows these moments to be painful. It allows her grief about the gap between the marriage she has and the marriage she might have wanted to be present on screen, quietly, without fanfare. And then it brings her back. It always brings her back. This is not presented as defeat. The show is careful about that. Marge returns to Homer, not because she has given up on something better, but because she has looked at the complete picture of what they are together and decided that the weight of what they have built is worth more to her than the possibility of something easier. She loves him with full knowledge of what he is. That choice, made again and again across 36 years, is the kind of love that is actually hard to write well, and the show manages it in its better moments with genuine depth. But the question that sits underneath all of it, the one the show raises and never quite answers, is whether Marge's return is fully free or whether it is also shaped by the same forces that shape everything in Springfield. Whether the patience, the grace, the extraordinary capacity for forgiveness and recommitment are purely her own, or whether they are also the result of 36 years in a contaminated environment that has altered the way she processes the world. Whether the fog that keeps Homer from seeing his life clearly is a version of the same fog that keeps Marge from leaving a life that sometimes asks more of her than anyone should be asked to give. The show does not answer this. Springfield does not answer things. Springfield manages them. It keeps them in the category of things that are simply how things are, unremarkable by virtue of repetition, invisible because they have always been there. Marge Simpson stands in the kitchen. Her hands are busy. The house smells like dinner. Outside, it is the kind of evening where the sky goes from orange to deep blue in a very short time, and the neighborhood is quiet, and the streetlights are coming on one by one down Evergreen Terrace. Somewhere upstairs, there is the sound of Bart doing something he should not be doing, and Marge hears it and files it away in the part of her mind that tracks these things and continues stirring. She is 34 years old. She will always be 34 years old. And somewhere inside that fixed, impossible number is a version of a woman who once stood in a high school parking lot with a head full of ambitions and a boy who looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he had ever seen, and thought that this might be the beginning of something very large. She was right. She just could not have known what shape the largeness would take. The lights in the house on Evergreen Terrace burn steadily through the evening, one by one, until they go out. The graffiti appears before anyone can stop it. One moment the surface is clean, a wall or a sidewalk or the side of a building that has been there long enough to become part of the neighborhood without anyone really seeing it anymore, and then it is not clean, And Bart Simpson is already gone, already down the street, already half a block away and picking up speed on his skateboard with the particular grin of someone who has done something irrevocable and is very pleased about it. This is the version of Bart that everyone knows. The one on the t-shirts, the one that launched 1,000 catchphrases, the one that parents in the early 90s were genuinely alarmed by, in the way that adults are always alarmed by the most accurate caricatures of their children. Bart the disruptor. Bart the smart-mouth, authority-defying, homework-refusing, teacher-tormenting personification of what happens when you let a 10-year-old watch too much television and tell him that feelings are for other people. That version of Bart is real. It is not performance, or it is not only performance. The defiance is genuine. The contempt for rules that seem arbitrary is genuine. The pleasure he takes in chaos has a realness to it that is hard to fake. But there is another version of Bart Simpson that the show has been building quietly for 36 years, in the spaces between the pranks and the detentions and the principal's office visits. And this version is significantly more interesting and significantly more difficult to look at directly. Because this version of Bart is a child who learned very early that the only power available to him was the power to disrupt, and who has been wielding that power for so long that he can no longer fully distinguish between the disruption and himself. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. In the real world, the child who first walked into Springfield Elementary in 1989 would be somewhere in his mid-40s now. He would have graduated high school, probably barely. He would have navigated adolescence, which would have been interesting. He would have made some version of a life for himself, whatever that looked like. He would have grown, but the timeline floats, and so Bart remains 10, the same age he was when the show began, cycling through the same academic failures and the same extracurricular disasters and the same fraught, tender, frequently violent relationship with his father, without ever moving forward. He is frozen at the age that is, in many ways, the sharpest and most exposed age to be frozen at. Old enough to understand that something is wrong, but young enough to have no real vocabulary for what it is or what to do about it. Old enough to feel the gap between where he is and where he wants to be. Young enough that closing the gap requires the help of adults who are not always available to provide it. The relationship between Bart and Homer is the beating and frequently bruised heart of the show, and it has always been complicated by the fact that neither of them has the tools to fully communicate what they mean to each other. Homer strangling Bart is a visual shorthand that the show has used so often it has become wallpaper, background noise, part of the texture of what a normal Tuesday looks like in the Simpson house. But look at it not as a cartoon punchline, and look at it as a portrait of a father and son who cannot reach each other. Homer's hands around Bart's throat is an expression of frustration so total that it has bypassed all the intermediate steps, the talking, the listening, the attempting to understand what the other person is actually feeling, and gone directly to the physical. And Bart's response is not fear, it is exhaustion. The 1,000-yard stare of a kid who has learned that this is simply what happens, that this is the shape love takes in this particular house. This is not to say that Homer does not love Bart. He does. The show has made this unambiguous in its more serious episodes. When Bart is in genuine danger, when something threatens him that goes beyond the ordinary Springfield variety of disaster, Homer's response is immediate and fierce and completely uncomplicated by the usual static of their relationship. The love is there. It simply arrives wrapped in a communication style that requires translation, and neither of them has ever learned the language. Bart's relationship with intelligence is one of the most interesting and least examined aspects of his character. He is frequently presented as the dumb sibling, the contrast to Lisa's effortless academic aptitude, the cautionary tale about what happens when you cannot sit still long enough to learn. But Bart is not stupid. Bart is, in many episodes, demonstrated to be genuinely quick, genuinely creative, genuinely capable of the kind of lateral thinking that does not always show up well on tests, but is its own kind of intelligence. His pranks require planning. His schemes require a working theory of mind, an understanding of how other people will respond to stimuli, what they are likely to do and not do, how to predict and manipulate outcomes. He is, in the domain that matters to him, quite good at what he does. The domain that matters to him is the domain of getting away with things. And this is where the sadder reading of Bart begins to take shape. Bart's entire behavioral repertoire is built around the question of what you do when the systems available to you are not going to work in your favor. He is the son of a man who is frequently absent in the ways that matter most. He attends a school run by a principal who is not who he says he is, which is a level of institutional unreliability that even Bart, who knows something is wrong with Skinner, does not have the full picture of. He lives in a town where the environment is almost certainly affecting his cognition in ways he cannot measure or name. He is surrounded by adults who are either too distracted or too damaged or too committed to the maintenance of the comfortable official version of things to provide him with real guidance. And so Bart navigates. He uses the tools available to him. He is disruptive because disruption gets attention, and attention is a form of presence, and presence is what he is short of. He breaks rules because the rules, as they are applied in Springfield, do not reliably protect the people they are supposed to protect, and a kid growing up watching that cannot be blamed for concluding that the rules are someone else's convenience rather than a shared standard that benefits everyone equally. The show has explored Bart's vulnerability in flashes. The episode where he discovers he has been held back, and the weight of that, the specific shame of academic failure in a family where Lisa's effortless excellence sets the standard. The episodes where his relationship with his father approaches something genuine and tender before retreating back behind the familiar noise. The episode where Bart befriends an elderly neighbor and the tenderness of that friendship is allowed to be real on screen, quiet and unexpected, before the episode resolves itself and everyone goes back to the usual positions. Bart has friends. Milhouse is his closest companion, a relationship that has been constant across the show's entire run, and is strange and particular, and genuinely affectionate in the way of children who have decided to commit to each other for reasons they cannot fully articulate, but both understand. Milhouse worships Bart in a way that is not entirely healthy, and that Bart does not always handle with the care it deserves. But the friendship is also real. It is one of the few stable things in Bart's life, and the show, when it is paying attention, honors it as such. His relationship with Lisa is the one that the show has handled with the most consistent depth. They fight, they compete, they reduce each other to tears with the specific precision that siblings develop over years of close proximity. But they also return to each other with a regularity that is not explained by obligation, but by something closer to recognition. They are the only two people in their immediate world who are fully aware that the world they live in is strange, that the things happening around them are not normal, that something is wrong and has been wrong for a long time. Lisa responds to this awareness by trying to fix things. Bart responds to it by trying to outrun it. But both of them are responding to the same underlying perception, and that shared perception is its own kind of bond. There is a future the show has occasionally glanced at, in flash-forward episodes and dream sequences and alternative timeline stories, where Bart has grown up badly, where the disruption calcified into something harder and more damaging, where the kid who was never given the right kind of attention or the right kind of structure became the man who fills that absence with things that do not fill it. These futures are presented as warnings, but they are also, in their way, honest extrapolations of what happens when a child's needs are met inadequately for long enough. Not because anyone is villainous, because the systems around him were simply not equal to what he needed. The radiation reading of Bart is interesting because his particular mutation, if we accept that framework, is not as dramatic as Homer's physical resilience or Maggie's cognitive capacity. Bart is clever and physically active and has the kind of energy that does not easily switch off, which, in a contaminated environment, might simply be what it looks like when certain systems are slightly overamplified without being fundamentally transformed. He is not extraordinary in the way that Maggie is extraordinary. He is just always on, always in motion, always generating. And perhaps that constant motion is itself the response. If your body is slightly wrong, if something in your environment is slightly off, one response is to go faster, to never be still enough for the wrongness to catch up with you. Bart on his skateboard, Bart mid-prank, Bart talking fast and moving fast and staying always one step ahead of whatever is coming, is a child who has figured out that the safest place to be is moving. The coma theory gives Bart a particular quality of sadness, if you accept its premise. Because in Homer's dream, Bart is 10. He is always 10. He will never be 11. He will never grow past the age he was when Homer lost consciousness, because Homer's dreaming mind cannot imagine his son's future. It can only replay his son's present. And so Bart, in the dream, is frozen, perpetually on the skateboard, perpetually in detention, perpetually just below the window of the school bus, looking out. Homer dreamed Bart's voice before he knew what kind of man Bart's voice would grow into. And now, In the dream, the voice never changes. Still a child's voice, still calling from upstairs, still somewhere in the house, making enough noise to prove he is there. That is the thing about Bart that gets lost in all the pranks and the catchphrases and the early 90s cultural panic about whether children's television was going to ruin an entire generation. What gets lost is that underneath all the noise, what Bart has always been doing at every volume and in every direction is proving that he is there, that he exists, that someone should notice. He is 10 years old. He has been proving it for 36 years. And Springfield keeps not quite noticing, because Springfield never quite notices anything it would be inconvenient to notice. But the skateboard keeps moving, the graffiti keeps appearing, and somewhere down the street, moving fast and not looking back, Bart Simpson is already gone. Lisa Simpson sits at the end of her bed at 11 o'clock on a school night, in the light from the lamp on her nightstand, and she is reading. She is always reading. The book could be anything. Philosophy or environmental science or a biography of a historical figure whose life gives her a model for being someone who made a difference, someone who pushed against the particular walls of their particular moment and left a mark. She reads with an intensity that is not quite separate from urgency, as if the books are not just interesting but necessary, as if the understanding she collects from them is a kind of protection against something. She is 8 years old. She will be 8 years old forever. Lisa Simpson is the closest thing to a protagonist that the show has, in the sense that she is the character most consistently in dialogue with what the show is actually about. She asks the questions. She names the things that other characters are working very hard not to name. She looks at Springfield and sees it clearly, with a clarity that is not rewarded and is sometimes actively punished, and she keeps looking anyway, because she does not know how to do anything else. She is also, beneath all of that, a child. Lonely in the specific way that extremely intelligent children are lonely, which is to say, capable of perceiving the gap between themselves and the people around them with enough precision to make the gap feel very large. She has tried to close the gap in various ways across the show's run. She has sought out mentors. She has befriended older students. She has, in her better episodes, found temporary communities of people who are operating at something closer to her level and has visibly relaxed into them, the particular relaxation of someone who has stopped translating. But Springfield is not a good environment for Lisa Simpson. It has never been a good environment for her. And the show knows this, and has spent 36 seasons making sure she knows it too, without ever quite letting her escape it. Let us begin with her family, because that is where all of it begins. Lisa was born into a house that loves her genuinely, but does not always know what to do with her. Homer is her father, and the love between them is one of the show's genuinely warm and moving through lines. But Homer's capacity to meet Lisa where she is intellectually is close to zero on most days. He tries. In the moments where the fog lifts, in the episodes where something cuts through to the version of Homer that has more cognitive capacity than his daily baseline allows, he and Lisa find each other in ways that are deeply tender. But those moments are rare and they do not persist. By the next episode, Homer is back to his ordinary level of engagement with the world, which is not at the level Lisa lives at. Marge provides a different kind of support, steadier and more consistent, but limited by Marge's own framework, which tends toward the practical and the social rather than the intellectual. Marge loves Lisa. She also sometimes finds Lisa's commitments exhausting, her idealism too high maintenance, her refusal to simply adjust to the way things are a kind of friction that the household, which runs on managed friction, does not always have room for. Bart is his own story, already covered. He and Lisa are closest when they are in opposition and closest when they forget to be in opposition, which happens more than either of them would easily admit. And Maggie is the one who sees her most clearly, which is not an accident, and which becomes more interesting when you consider what the rest of this telling has to say about Maggie's capacity for perception. Lisa's intelligence has been quantified on the show in various ways, always upward, always suggesting a ceiling that turns out to be higher than the previous measurement indicated. She plays the saxophone with a seriousness and a talent that is extraordinary for her age. She engages with political and philosophical and environmental material at a level that would be remarkable in an adult, and is, in an 8-year-old, something closer to genuinely unusual. She has won academic competitions. She has produced work that professionals in relevant fields have taken seriously. She is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most gifted children in the fictional history of American television. And Springfield has no idea what to do with her. This is not Springfield being uniquely cruel, though it is sometimes that. It is Springfield being what small communities have always been, which is organized around a set of implicit norms that define what a normal person looks like and what a normal person does, and which have very limited vocabulary for people who do not fit that template. Lisa does not fit the template. Lisa has never fit the template. And the cost of being a person who does not fit the template in a place like Springfield is a particular kind of isolation that compounds over time. Her teachers, with some notable exceptions, are not equipped to handle her. Her classmates, with some notable exceptions, are not interested in the things she is interested in or capable of engaging with her at the level she needs. The town itself is indifferent to her concerns, which are real and substantiated, about the environment and institutional corruption and the things being done to Springfield by the same forces that keep it running. There is an episode where Lisa submits an environmental report about the state of Springfield's water quality, and the response from the town establishment is essentially that the report is too alarming to be useful. That the data she has gathered, which is accurate, is not the kind of data that Springfield is prepared to act on. This is presented for laughs. It is also a very precise description of what it is like to be a person who tells the truth in a community that has organized itself around not knowing it. Lisa keeps telling it anyway. This is not stubbornness, or not only stubbornness. It is something closer to a compulsion, the inability of an extremely honest mind to leave a lie unaddressed even when addressing the lie costs more than letting it go. She cannot make herself look at something wrong and pretend she does not see it. The pretending would require a kind of internal accommodation to untruth that is not available to her, that her particular mind does not allow. This is her greatest quality and her greatest source of suffering, and the show has understood this about her from nearly the beginning. The saxophone is worth spending time with. Lisa's relationship with her instrument is one of the most carefully rendered things in the show's entire run. She plays jazz, specifically, which is already a choice that marks her as outside the mainstream of her age group. Jazz is not what 8-year-olds play, generally. Jazz is complicated and improvisational and requires a tolerance for uncertainty, for the note that has not been decided yet, for the space between the bars where something unexpected might emerge. Lisa plays jazz because jazz is the music of people who have something to say and have found a form that can hold the complexity of it. When she plays, she is doing the thing that she cannot always do in the rest of her life. She is speaking in a language that does not require translation. She is in a mode where her peculiarity is not a liability but a source. The saxophone does not care that she is too smart for her grade. The saxophone does not find her exhausting. The saxophone just carries what she puts into it, and what she puts into it is everything she cannot otherwise express. There are episodes where Lisa loses her saxophone, or is separated from it, or is in circumstances where she cannot play, and the specific quality of her distress in those moments is not like her distress about other things. It is quieter and more total. It is the distress of someone who has had the one place they are fully themselves temporarily removed. Her Buddhism is related to this. Lisa's spiritual journey, which she undertakes when she finds herself unable to live comfortably inside the aggressive consumer culture of Springfield without some framework for managing its cognitive dissonance, is another version of the same search. She is looking for a system of understanding that is large enough to hold both the world as it is and her feeling that the world should be different, without requiring her to choose one at the expense of the other. Buddhism, as she practices it, gives her that space. Not without cost, because the show is honest about the ways that Lisa's spiritual commitments sometimes isolate her further from the people around her. But the cost is one she is willing to pay because the alternative is a version of herself that she cannot inhabit. Her vegetarianism belongs in the same category. Lisa does not become a vegetarian for social reasons or for aesthetic ones. She becomes one because she looked at something directly and could not unsee it, and once she could not unsee it, she could not continue as if she had not seen it. This is her pattern. This is who she is. She looks at things. She registers what they actually are. She changes her behavior accordingly, even when changing her behavior is inconvenient and socially costly and makes dinner more complicated for the entire family. Homer's response to Lisa's vegetarianism is a whole study in itself. He is not cruel about it exactly. He is just completely baffled by it, in the way that he is baffled by most things that require him to understand someone else's interiority. He does not get it. He tries, briefly, to get it. He does not get it. He gives up trying to get it and returns to his hamburger. And Lisa, watching this, absorbs another small version of the same lesson that Springfield keeps teaching her. The thing you believe, the thing you have thought through carefully and arrived at from genuine understanding, is not going to land for most of the people around you. Not because they are bad people, because they are not living in the same relationship to their own perception that she is. The flash-forward episodes are where the show most directly addresses what Lisa's future might look like, and they are interesting in their consistency. Lisa, as an adult, is always recognizable. She is always someone who has made a mark, who has contributed something, who has become the version of herself that the show always implied she would become if the circumstances around her allowed it. She is also, in these futures, somewhat lonely. Not entirely, not devastatingly, but marked by the same isolation that characterized her childhood. The intelligence did not become less isolating as she got older. It became, if anything, more precise in the way it separated her from ordinary social life. This is the honest projection. The show does not lie about this. It is difficult to be Lisa Simpson, in Springfield or anywhere else, because being Lisa Simpson requires the particular courage of someone who cannot stop telling the truth even when the truth is unwelcome, and that courage does not eventually become easier. It just becomes more habitual. Under the radiation theory, Lisa is the anomaly. In a town where the contamination has reduced most of its residents' cognitive function to various degrees, something in Lisa's particular biology responded differently. The same poison that gave Homer his physical resilience and his cognitive fog gave Lisa an amplified version of the intelligence that was already there. It is as if the radiation hit a mind that was already oriented toward clarity and sharpened it past any normal human calibration. She is too smart for Springfield in a way that might be, at least partly, the result of what Springfield's poison did to her. This is a dark reading because it means that Lisa's greatest gift and her greatest source of suffering are both products of the same contamination. She is extraordinary because of what Springfield did to her. She is isolated because of what Springfield did to her. The town that gave her no place she fits is also the town that made her too unusual to fit anywhere else. The coma reading is equally difficult. If Homer is dreaming, then Lisa is what Homer imagines his daughter to be. She is brilliant and articulate and principled in ways that Homer himself never managed. She is the version of potential that Homer, somewhere in the part of himself that can still perceive potential, believes should have been more possible in the Simpson family. He dreams her extraordinary, because in the dream he is allowed to give her the gifts he could not give her in waking life. The intelligence, the seriousness, the sense that she will be okay even in a world that does not always treat her fairly. Homer's Lisa is a father's projection of hope for a daughter he loves more than he can say, which is very beautiful and very sad in the way that all of the coma theory's implications eventually land as very beautiful and very sad. Lisa Simpson sits at the end of her bed at 11 o'clock on a school night. The book is still open, the lamp is still on. Somewhere down the hall, the sounds of the house have settled into their evening register. She reads for a while longer. Then she picks up her saxophone and plays something low and exploratory, something that is not quite a melody yet but is looking for one. The sound moves through the house and out the open window and into the Springfield evening. Nobody in the neighborhood hears it as anything other than background sound. This is Springfield. The saxophone in the window on Evergreen Terrace is just part of what the evening sounds like here. Nobody stops to listen. Nobody comes to the window. The music goes out and dissolves into the larger dark. But Lisa plays until she finds the note she was looking for, and then she plays past it into whatever comes next. She is 8 years old. She will always be 8 years old, and she has never stopped looking for what comes next. She is in the playpen. She is always in the playpen, or in the crib, or in the baby carrier strapped to Marge's front, or sitting on the kitchen floor with a set of large plastic blocks that she stacks and unstacks with an expression of extreme concentration, as if she is not playing but working. As if the blocks are a problem to be solved rather than a toy to be enjoyed. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She has seen things that no 1 year old should have seen. She has done things that no 1 year old should have done. She has, in the course of her single year of existence, shot a billionaire, led a revolution in a daycare facility, saved her family's lives on multiple occasions, and demonstrated a level of strategic reasoning that most adults could not reliably replicate under comparable pressure. She has done all of this without saying a word, and the silence is not accidental. and it is not a limitation, and the longer you sit with it, the clearer it becomes that the silence is the smartest thing about her. Let us begin with the shooting, because the shooting is always where you have to begin with Maggie, not because it is the most interesting thing about her, but because it is the event that established the terms of how the world receives her. A baby shot a man, the richest man in Springfield. He survived, came to, identified her, and the police closed the case by pointing out that no jury would ever convict an infant. And that was the official end of it. Except nothing in Springfield ends the way the official version says it does. Look at the final shot of that episode one more time. This is the shot that theorists return to again and again, and with good reason. Everyone else has left the hospital room. Burns has been taken somewhere. The investigators have filed their reports. The family has gone home. And Maggie is alone in the room, in the way that babies are often alone in rooms because adults underestimate how much babies notice. She looks around. This is the first thing to note, that she looks around, that she checks her surroundings, that she performs the kind of spatial awareness that implies a theory of mind, an understanding that other people exist and that other people's presence or absence matters. She confirms she is alone, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the act of pulling a trigger. A 1-year-old child who cannot yet walk reliably, performing a deliberate, controlled gesture that requires her to remember an event, connect the gesture to the event, assess the social risk of performing the gesture in the presence of others, decide the social risk is too high, wait for the room to clear, and then perform it privately. This is not how 1-year-olds behave. This is how people with sophisticated social intelligence behave. People who understand that some things are only safe to acknowledge in private. People who have internalized the concept of secrets. Maggie is 1 year old. She is keeping a secret. The theory that Maggie's silence is strategic rather than developmental is the framework that makes the rest of her behavior cohere. Once you accept it, everything else falls into place. The pacifier that is always in her mouth is not comfort, or not only comfort. It is cover. It is the object that signals to the adult world that she is in the mode that babies are in, the passive, receptive, pre-linguistic mode that adults respond to by forgetting to be careful about what they say and do in the baby's presence. The pacifier keeps adults in a particular mode of relating to her, one in which they are less guarded, less deliberate, less likely to censor the information they allow to flow in her direction. Maggie, behind the pacifier, processes all of it. Think about what she has heard over the course of 36 years in that house on Evergreen Terrace. She has heard Homer and Marge's conversations, including the ones that happen after the children are presumed to be asleep. She has heard discussions of money and fear and marital strain and the particular texture of her parents' relationship in its unguarded moments. She has heard Bart and Lisa fight about things that matter to them in ways they do not bother filtering because it is just Maggie. Maggie is the baby. Maggie is not processing this. She has heard the television. She has absorbed whatever ambient information Springfield generates over 36 years of ordinary and extraordinary domestic life. And she has not said a word. Not because she cannot. The show has established that Maggie can produce sound, that she spoke one word voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in an early episode, that the capacity for language is not absent. The word she said was daddy, which is, under the coma theory, a detail that takes on a different weight entirely, but we will come back to that. The point is that the capacity exists. The silence is elected. Why would a person with extraordinary cognitive capacity elect silence in a family like The Simpsons? Look at what happens to the people in the family who speak. Homer speaks, constantly, voluminously, and the results are mixed at best and catastrophic at worst. Homer's mouth has gotten him into more trouble than any other single aspect of his character. His words have damaged his relationships, created his disasters, made his problems worse, and occasionally led the family into genuine crisis. Homer is not better for speaking. He is frequently worse. Bart speaks constantly, which is part of the problem. Bart's mouth is where his troubles begin. Every detention started with a word. Every conflict with Skinner started with a word. Every time Bart gets into the trouble that defines the shape of his existence, the trouble starts with something he said that he should not have said, or said to someone he should not have said it to, or said in a way that ensured the worst possible interpretation. And Lisa. Lisa is the case study. Lisa speaks carefully, thoughtfully, with precision and genuine moral weight. Lisa says things that are true and important and backed by evidence. And Springfield ignores her, dismisses her, punishes her for it, and moves on. Lisa speaks and it costs her. Every time. Maggie watched this. Maggie absorbed the data, and Maggie drew the logical conclusion, which is that in this particular household, in this particular town, the cost-benefit analysis of speaking is not favorable. That the things she might say would not land the way she would want them to land. That the people around her would not respond to her speech the way they would respond to Lisa's speech because she is a baby, and the discount applied to a baby's words would be total. Nobody would hear what she said. They would hear that a baby had made sounds. And then they would marvel at the sounds and coo at her and miss whatever she was actually trying to communicate. The discount problem is its own kind of trap, and Maggie seems to have understood it earlier than most adults ever get around to understanding it. She cannot speak from within the baby category and be taken seriously. Speaking from that category would only produce the performance of being heard while actually being dismissed. So she does not give people the satisfaction of dismissing her. She keeps the intelligence interior. She keeps the information to herself. And she acts when acting is the option that the situation requires. The Longest Daycare, the Academy Award-nominated theatrical short, is the fullest display of Maggie's operational capacity that the show has produced. In that story, she is dropped at a facility that is running a regime she does not like, and she is confronted with a problem, a creature she wants to protect, and a bully who wants to harm it. And she addresses the problem with a systematic thoroughness that is genuinely impressive. She reads the environment. She observes the bully's patterns. She identifies the structural features of the facility that she can use to her advantage. She develops a plan that requires her to anticipate multiple people's behavior accurately, including the behavior of the adults who are supposed to be supervising her. She executes the plan with adjustments for the variables that did not behave the way she predicted. She succeeds. She is 1 year old. She cannot run without falling over. And she executes a multi-stage plan with contingencies. The physical limitation is the critical detail here. Maggie's body is a 1-year-old body. It has the motor control and the physical capacity of a 1-year-old body, which is to say, approximately none. She falls, she stumbles, she cannot cover distances quickly. Her hands are not precise instruments. Every physical action she takes requires her to work around a body that cannot keep up with what her mind is asking it to do. She compensates by planning more precisely, by using her environment more cleverly, by finding solutions that minimize the need for physical precision. She is a mind that has been handed a very inadequate physical interface and has gotten very good at using it anyway. This is the part of Maggie that connects most directly to the radiation theory, and the connection is not comfortable. If the environmental contamination of Springfield produces mutations, and if those mutations affect residents differently based on their biology and their exposure, then Maggie represents a particular experimental case. She was born into the contaminated environment. She has lived her entire life inside it, at the age when biological systems are most plastic, most responsive to environmental signals, most likely to be shaped permanently by what surrounds them. The contamination hit her earliest, and has had the most time to influence the development of her systems. And what it appears to have done is exactly what the radiation theory's broader framework would predict. In a family where the contamination has produced wide variation in cognitive effects, from Homer's fog to Lisa's amplification, Maggie's case is the most extreme amplification. Her intelligence is not just high. It is in a category that standardized testing cannot measure, because standardized testing was designed for people whose minds operate within certain recognizable parameters, and Maggie's mind does not. What the contamination has not done is accelerate her physical development. Her body is still a 1-year-old's body. The mutation was cognitive, not physical. And so, you have a mind of extraordinary capacity housed in a body that cannot express it through any of the normal channels, cannot speak, cannot walk without assistance, cannot reach things on shelves, cannot operate in the adult world except by operating on adults who do not realize they are being operated on. This is the most unsettling version of Maggie, the one who is fully conscious of her situation, fully aware of the gap between what she can perceive and what she can do about it, and who has decided that the optimal strategy, given those constraints, is to wait, to watch, to build the fullest possible picture of the world she is in, and to act surgically in the specific moments where her action can actually change something, while maintaining the cover of helplessness the rest of the time. She shot Burns. This is the data point people tend to start with, but think about what the shooting actually demonstrates about her, if it was intentional. It demonstrates that she assessed a situation, identified a threat, and responded to the threat with a decisive action that required finding a weapon, handling it despite her motor limitations, and firing it at a target. It demonstrates that she has a working theory of violence as a tool, that she understands cause and effect at a level that includes physical harm as a category of outcome, and that she can, when the situation is sufficient, choose to deploy that understanding. She is 1 year old. Burns falling on the sundial with his hands on those specific letters, which the show presents as pointing toward Maggie Simpson, is described by Burns himself as accidental. He did not deliberately gesture toward his attacker, he just fell, which means the evidence that officially convicted Maggie of the shooting is, according to the victim, meaningless. And Burns, when he came to, identified Maggie as the shooter in a statement that was accepted at face value because, as Wiggum noted, there was nothing legally actionable anyway. What if Burns identified Maggie not because she shot him, but because she was the only witness to what actually happened in that parking lot? What if Burns, in a moment of consciousness, looked at the people assembled around him and decided that blaming the person least capable of defending herself against the accusation was the cleanest possible move? What if the 1-year-old was framed? Under that reading, Maggie's final gesture in the episode is not a confession. It is a memory. She watched someone else shoot Burns. She is replaying what she saw, privately, in the quiet of an empty room, because she has no one to tell and no way to tell them. Or she did it and she knows what she did and she has decided that the knowledge is safer kept between herself and the gun. With Maggie, both readings are always possible at once. This is her design. This is what she has built for herself over 36 years of deliberate silence. She is always readable 2 ways. Always the baby who cannot know better and always the mind that knows everything. The question the show never answers about Maggie, the one that sits in the space behind her enormous eyes and her constant pacifier, is what she is waiting for. Because she is clearly waiting. The intelligence is real, the capability has been demonstrated, the strategic patience is evident. She is not simply existing in her 1-year-old body, passively letting the world flow past her. She is accumulating, she is learning, she is building something inside herself that the rest of Springfield has not earned the right to see yet. What does Maggie Simpson do when she finally acts? What does Springfield look like when the baby who has been watching it for 36 years from the height of a playpen decides that the time for watching is over? The show has not told us. It may never tell us. And maybe that restraint is the point. Because Maggie is the only Simpson whose story remains genuinely open, whose future is not yet written, whose potential has not been capped by the show's 36-year commitment to keeping everyone exactly where they started, she is still in the playpen. She is still waiting. The most dangerous thing in Springfield is not the nuclear reactor. It is not Mr. Burns. With all his money and all his grudges and all his medical infrastructure, it is not even the contaminated water or the cracked cooling towers or the slowly degrading population that cannot remember why it should ask questions. The most dangerous thing in Springfield is the 1-year-old in the playpen who has been watching all of it and saying nothing. She is waiting for the right moment, and when she finds it, Springfield will not see it coming. Because that is exactly how she designed it. He moves through the world in a way that very old things move, with a quality of motion that belongs less to locomotion than to the slow passage of geological formations. His body is a collection of angles rather than curves, elbows and shoulders, and the forward pitch of his head that gives him the permanent posture of someone leaning slightly into the future, as if he is still pressing towards something, still reaching, after more than a century of pressing and reaching. His eyes are very small and very alert, set deep in his head, looking out at a world that has changed around him many times without ever quite touching him. He cannot remember Homer Simpson's name. He has worked alongside Homer for decades. He has had more interactions with this particular employee than with almost any other person in his daily life, because Homer's particular brand of disaster tends to find its way to Burns's attention on a regular basis. He knows Homer is there. He refers to him by wrong names. He moves past him in hallways without recognition, and this is presented as a joke, as a symptom of Burns's aristocratic indifference to the lower orders, as simply what it looks like when a man of his particular vintage and temperament cannot be bothered to maintain information about people he considers below the threshold of significance. But consider it from another angle. Burns has been alive for well over 100 years, by the most conservative reading of the show's scattered chronological evidence. A century of human beings. A century of names and faces and contexts, all accumulated in a brain that has been functioning under extraordinary biochemical duress for longer than any brain was designed to function. The failure to remember Homer's name may not be indifference. It may be the first visible sign of what happens to a mind that has been asked to carry more than any mind was built to hold. Charles Montgomery Burns is the oldest man in Springfield. He is quite possibly the oldest man in America. He is kept alive by a weekly medical regimen so extreme that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. He has every disease known to medical science simultaneously, and they are kept in perfect equilibrium by the same treatments that maintain his bodily functions, each illness blocking every other illness from progressing, a biological gridlock that the show describes as Three Stooges syndrome and plays for laughs, but which, considered carefully, is the portrait of a body that has been so thoroughly compromised by time and radiation and whatever else has been put into it over the decades that it has simply stopped being able to die through any single mechanism, because every mechanism is in conflict with every other mechanism. He is not immortal in any clean or simple sense. He is instead too expensive to die, too carefully maintained, too thoroughly dependent on a system of medical infrastructure that he has spent a century building specifically for the purpose of ensuring his continued existence. Let us do the history, because the history is where Burns becomes something more than a cartoon villain. He was born in the late 1800s. The show has put specific dates in his orbit across various episodes, none of them fully consistent, but all of them placing his origins somewhere in the final quarter of the 19th century. He grew up in a family of considerable wealth, the Burns dynasty being one of those American fortunes that predates the notion of American fortunes, as something the country consciously produces, an older kind of wealth, the kind accumulated during the period when the mechanisms for doing so were not yet regulated in any meaningful way. He attended Yale, or rather he attended a version of Yale that was barely recognizable as the institution it became. He served in World War II, which places him as elderly during a conflict that ended in 1945, meaning his longevity is not merely impressive but structurally impossible by any normal biological standard. He has described personal relationships with historical figures who died in the early 20th century. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during wartime and held it for decades, which is not the action of a man whose cognitive function has significantly deteriorated. That requires sustained strategic thinking across a timeline that defies normal human experience. He is not a man in any ordinary sense. He is a project. He is what happens when a person with essentially unlimited resources decides that death is an engineering problem rather than an inevitability, and applies a century of wealth and ingenuity to solving it. The weekly treatment is the mechanism the show gives us. Burns undergoes a medical regimen that involves radiation, among other things, and the specifics of the treatment are never fully elaborated because the show does not need them to be. The concept is sufficient. What the concept gives us is a Burns whose life is literally on a clock, whose existence resets every 7 days, who must submit himself to a process that would be fatal to anyone without his particular adaptive biology simply in order to continue functioning for another week. This dependency is interesting for several reasons. Burns is, in the popular imagination of the show's audience, the ultimate figure of power. He is the man who has everything, who controls everything, who can do anything to anyone without meaningful consequence. The fantasy of power that Burns represents is of the kind that is subject to no external constraint. And yet he is entirely dependent on the treatment, dependent on Smithers to schedule and manage and ensure the treatment happens when it needs to happen, dependent on the pharmaceutical and medical infrastructure that produces the compounds his body requires, dependent on the continued functioning of a system he built but cannot operate alone. Remove Smithers and Burns is dead within a week. Remove the medical supply chain and Burns is dead within a week. For all his power, for all his century of accumulated wealth and influence, the continued functioning of his body depends entirely on other people doing their jobs correctly on a 7-day cycle. Smithers understands this. This is the layer of their relationship that the show treats as comedy, but which, examined carefully, is something more interesting. Smithers is devoted to Burns. The show has coded that devotion in various ways across its run, and the most prominent reading is that Smithers is in love with his employer in a way that his employer does not reciprocate and perhaps does not even register. This is true, and it is worth taking seriously as a portrait of a particular kind of painful relationship. But it is not the only layer. Smithers also knows that he is the person standing between Burns and death. He manages the schedule. He knows what happens if the schedule is not managed. He has access to information about Burns's medical condition that no one else possesses, and he has almost certainly considered, at some point in the long years of their association, what his leverage in that situation actually is. He does not use that leverage. He does not threaten Burns with it. He does not even appear to think of it as leverage. But it is there. Smithers, the humble assistant, the devoted second, is the single most important person in Charles Montgomery Burns's survival equation. This dynamic would be intriguing in any context. In the context of Springfield, where the power structures are so thoroughly weighted toward the people at the top of the economic food chain, it is one of the show's quietest and most telling reversals. Burns's relationship to Springfield as a whole is worth examining because it is not purely extractive, though it is mostly extractive. Burns needs Springfield the way the town needs him. The power plant is the source of his continued operation. The water table and the environment that the plant's operations have contaminated are also the source of the research environment he has been able to sustain over decades, a population of long-term exposure subjects living in close proximity to his operations, whose biological responses to chronic radiation exposure he has been monitoring in one form or another for the entirety of his tenure. The town is not just his workforce. It may, in the most disturbing reading of the available evidence, be his laboratory. The three-eyed fish was not just a news story, it was data. When Blinky appeared and became a political issue during the gubernatorial campaign, Burns's response was not the response of someone who was surprised or alarmed by what the fish represented. His response was calculated and performance-oriented. He ate the fish on television to demonstrate its harmlessness, but the performance was designed to suppress the question rather than address it. The question of what was in the water had a very specific answer, and the answer was precisely what Burns's operations had been putting there. He knew what the fish meant because he knew what the plant was doing. He had always known. The biological weapons facility that Mona Simpson raided in 1969 is the piece of the puzzle that places Burns's operation in a different category from simply irresponsible industrial practices. A nuclear power plant that maintains unsafe conditions through negligence is one kind of institution. A nuclear power plant whose owner also operates a germ warfare facility and who has been accused of conducting long-term environmental contamination of the surrounding population is a different category of thing entirely. It is the kind of thing that, if the evidence were assembled and presented clearly, would be difficult to explain as anything other than intentional. Burns has never been held accountable for any of it. He has come close, occasionally. He has been shot. He has been convicted of things and then unconvicted through mechanisms that his money made available. He has faced regulatory action that his political connections neutralized. He has been confronted with evidence of his crimes by individuals who subsequently found themselves unable to pursue the matter through any available channel. The system he built over a century is not designed to keep him out of trouble. It is designed to ensure that trouble has nowhere to land. His age, if it were known and acknowledged, would itself be a scandal of a sort. What Burns knows, what he has seen and done over more than 100 years, represents a kind of historical continuity that is genuinely extraordinary. He has been present through events that have now passed into textbooks. He knew people who are now historical figures. He has watched institutions form and dissolve. He has participated in the shaping of the economic and political landscape of the country across a timeline that no other living person shares. And he has used all of that continuity, all of that accumulated knowledge and relationship and influence exclusively in the service of his own preservation and accumulation. Nothing he has done in over a century has been oriented toward anything outside himself. He has not built things that outlasted him because he did not intend to allow the question of outlasting to arise. He has not invested in communities because communities are resources to be managed, not relationships to be maintained. He has not formed genuine human connections because genuine human connections introduce variables he cannot control and vulnerabilities he cannot afford. He is, in this reading, not a human being who has been corrupted by power. He is something that was never quite a human being in the relevant sense, something that processed human experience through a framework of pure accumulation and control for so long that the possibility of other frameworks has simply ceased to be legible to him. He does not hate the people of Springfield. He does not hate anyone. Hate requires a degree of emotional investment that Burns has long since metabolized out of his system. He manages the people of Springfield the way he manages the plant. They are resources. They are inputs. They produce outputs. They require maintenance. The one thing that disturbs the clean logic of Burns's operation, the one variable that his century of careful management has not fully contained, is mortality. His own. He has bought time. He has engineered an extended run that should not have been possible. But the weekly treatment, the absolute dependency on Smithers, the delicate disease equilibrium that must be maintained through external intervention, these are not solutions to the problem of death. They are sophisticated deferrals. Burns knows this. He has known it for a long time. He has been managing the knowledge by not examining it too directly, because examining it would require acknowledging that there is a limit to what his resources can buy. And there is very little that Charles Montgomery Burns fears more than the acknowledgement of a limit. He sits in his office at the top of the plant. The windows look out over Springfield, over the cracked cooling towers and the river where three-eyed fish swim in water that nobody in the town tests anymore because they stopped asking the question years ago. He sits behind his desk, his fingers steepled in front of him, the gesture so characteristic it has become a kind of shorthand for the whole man. And he thinks. He is always thinking. A century of practice has made him very good at it. He is the oldest man in Springfield. He is possibly the oldest man in America. He has purchased more time than anyone else in the history of his particular zip code, and he intends to purchase more. The plant will keep running. The treatments will keep coming. Smithers will keep scheduling. And Springfield will keep producing the particular kind of population that can be managed indefinitely, dependent and compliant and too fogged by their own contaminated environment to look up from their daily lives and ask why the richest man in town glows faintly in the dark and cannot remember having been born. He comes out of the house at 6:30 in the morning. He has been awake since 5, which is when his alarm goes off, and he has spent the intervening 90 minutes in the sequence he follows every day. Prayer, which takes the form of a genuinely quiet conversation with a God he believes is listening. Exercise, modest but consistent, the kind maintained over decades rather than performed in bursts. A breakfast that is practical and wholesome and prepared carefully, because Ned Flanders believes that the way you treat small things is the way you treat large things, and that caring for a bowl of oatmeal with attention is not different in kind from caring for a person with attention. He comes out of the house at 6:30, and the air is whatever Springfield's air is, which carries with it the distant industrial undertone that has been there for so long that nobody notices it anymore. He breathes it in. He waves to the mail carrier. He checks on the flower bed that runs along the front of his house with the same attentiveness he gives everything, because the flowers require the same quality of attention whether anyone is watching or not. He glances at the house next door. The house with the cracked sidewalk and the car in the driveway that might not start today, and the windows that show the blue flicker of a television that never really goes all the way off. His neighbor's house? Homer's house. He glances at it with an expression that has, over the course of 36 years, become very difficult to read cleanly. There is something in it that the show has never quite named, because naming it would require a level of honesty about Ned Flanders that the show has generally preferred to approach sideways. Ned Flanders is the best person in Springfield. He is also the most tragic figure in the show's extended cast, and the tragedy is not dramatic or loud or even particularly visible. It lives quietly behind his relentless positivity, behind the cheerful verbal tics and the diddly-dumb speech patterns, and the neighborly helpfulness that has made him one of television's most recognizable secondary characters. The tragedy is this: Ned Flanders has spent his entire life doing everything right. And everything right has cost him more than almost anyone else in Springfield has been asked to pay. Let us be specific about what Ned believes. He is a devout Christian of a particular American evangelical variety, which the show depicts with a consistent mixture of affection and gentle satire, but never with contempt. His faith is genuine. It is not performed for the approval of others. It is not a social identity or a tribal affiliation. It is the thing he organizes his life around, the framework through which he understands causality and morality and the proper relationship between his own behavior and his outcomes. He believes that goodness is rewarded. He believes that patience and generosity and forgiveness are not just virtues but practical strategies. He believes that the universe is fundamentally ordered in a way that aligns with these beliefs. Springfield has spent 36 years providing evidence against this worldview, and Ned has spent 36 years finding ways to maintain it anyway. This is not stupidity. This is a commitment of a very particular kind. The commitment of someone who has decided that his beliefs are not empirically derived and therefore empirical evidence is not, strictly speaking, relevant to them. This is, depending on how you look at it, either a profound spiritual resilience or a very sophisticated form of denial. The case for it being denial gets significantly stronger when you know the backstory. Ned Flanders was not always this person. This is the revelation from the episode where his house is destroyed and he is institutionalized after his breakdown, which the show uses as an opportunity to explain what Ned actually is and how he came to be it. The revelation is that Ned, as a child, was unmanageable, genuinely uncontrollable, the kind of child that exhausts every adult around him and generates chaos as naturally as he generates anything else. His parents, being people of a particular era and a particular philosophical bent, did not believe in conventional discipline. They were free spirits, beatniks, people who felt that structure imposed on children was a kind of violence against their natural development. The result was a child with no structure, which sounds like it should produce a free and creative spirit but instead produced a child in crisis, a child who had no tools for managing the considerable emotional and physical energy he generated, a child who was spinning and could not stop. A psychiatrist was consulted. The psychiatrist's solution was behavioral modification therapy, which in the context of the show is presented as an aggressive and sustained process of conditioning. Over a significant period of time, the aggression was conditioned out of Ned. The anger was conditioned out. The chaos was conditioned out. What was left, after the conditioning was complete, was the version of Ned Flanders that Springfield knows. The patient one. The kind one. The one who forgives everything because his brain was rebuilt, in childhood, around the principle that anger is not an option, that the emotions that would lead to anger must be suppressed before they reach any threshold that might allow them expression. The niceness is not character. It is the cage. And the thing about cages is that they hold things. Whatever was conditioned out of Ned did not cease to exist. It was routed around, suppressed, given no outlet. The rage that belonged to the child who was unmanageable is still in there. The hurricane episode proves it. When the conditioning fails under sufficient pressure and Ned's breakdown is not a gentle expression of sadness, but a volcanic eruption of everything he has been holding behind the wall for decades, screaming at the people who have, in various ways, failed him, saying things he has been thinking for years but has never been permitted to say. And then he is institutionalized. And then he is treated. And then the conditioning is reinforced and he returns to Springfield and he is, again, Ned Flanders. Patient and generous and forgiving. He forgave Homer for killing Maude. Think about this for a moment. Homer's selfish behavior, his reflexive self-preservation in the face of incoming foam projectiles, redirected a t-shirt cannon's output in a way that struck Maude Flanders and killed her. Not deliberately. Not with malice, but as the direct result of Homer doing what Homer always does, which is prioritizing his own comfort without considering what his actions displace onto other people. Maude died. She died because Homer moved out of the way. And Ned, after the appropriate period of grief, which the show handles with more genuine care than might have been expected, forgave Homer. Because that is what Ned does. That is the only response his conditioning allows him. The forgiveness is not grace. It is a reflex. It is as involuntary, in its way, as a physical reflex, the knee-jerk response of a nervous system trained from childhood to produce forgiveness whenever the stimulus of wrongdoing is presented. Ned cannot choose not to forgive. The choice was removed from him by a psychiatrist in a room somewhere when he was a small child, and it has not been available to him since. This is the darkest fact about Ned Flanders. He is the most morally admired character in Springfield, and he is not making moral choices. He is executing a behavioral program that was installed in him without his consent when he was too young to understand what was being done to him. His virtue is not his own. It belongs to the process that made him. God talks to Homer. This is canonical. The show has depicted Homer's direct conversations with God on multiple occasions. The God of the Simpsons universe is real, is present, is demonstrably accessible to at least some Springfield residents. And the resident God chooses to communicate with is the one who falls asleep in church, who treats religion as a social convenience, who has produced a lifetime of behavior that would not pass any reasonable moral audit. Ned, who goes to church every week with his sons, who studies scripture, who prays daily, who has organized the complete architecture of his life around his relationship with God, has never received a comparable communication. The show has occasionally allowed Ned to feel the presence of something divine, but the direct conversation, the face-to-face encounter that Homer has been granted multiple times, has not been available to Ned. The cruelty of this distribution is so specific that it cannot be accidental. The show is making a statement, and the statement is this: the universe of Springfield, the one that was built by whoever built it, does not operate on the principle that goodness is rewarded. The universe of Springfield rewards something else, something that looks less like virtue and more like resilience. The ability to absorb catastrophe and return to baseline. The capacity to fail continuously and persist anyway. Homer has this capacity in abundance. Ned has virtue and very little of the other thing, because virtue is supposed to make the other thing unnecessary, and in Springfield it does not. Ned's two sons, Rod and Todd, are themselves a study in what it looks like when the Flanders conditioning is applied to a second generation. They are gentle and sweet and terrified of the world in a way that is both touching and faintly alarming. They have been raised in a house where anger is not permitted, where disagreement is framed as a spiritual failure, where the emotional range available to them has been carefully pruned into the register that Ned believes is appropriate for Christian children. They are good boys. They are also boys who have not been given the full suite of emotional tools that people need for navigating a world that is not as orderly or as kind as Ned's framework suggests it should be. They live next door to Bart Simpson, which is perhaps the universe's most pointed joke about the Flanders family. Every morning Bart goes outside and is, in various ways, exactly the kind of uncontrolled energy that Ned was before the conditioning. Rod and Todd watch him with something that is difficult to categorize. Not quite admiration, not quite fear, something in between. Something that recognizes in Bart's freedom a quality that is absent from their own experience. The gap between the Flanders house and the Simpson house is the show's most sustained and most revealing spatial metaphor. They are next door to each other. The doors of their houses face the same street. The children of both households have spent their lives within shouting distance of each other, and the values operating inside those two structures are so different as to constitute different moral universes. Homer's household operates on love and chaos. Things are broken and fixed and broken again. Rules are established and immediately violated. Consequences occur and are absorbed and forgotten. The emotional register of the Simpson house is loud and unpredictable, and frequently involves things being thrown or overturned, but it is alive. It has the aliveness of a place where people feel things fully and express them badly, and learn, imperfectly, from the mess. Ned's household is orderly and quiet, and consistently managed. It is also, in its way, constrained. The aliveness is managed down to an acceptable level. The appropriate emotions are expressed at appropriate volumes. Everything is fine and contained and directed toward the right ends. And God has never visited Ned's house. Not the way he visited Homer's. There is a version of this that Ned has thought about. He is not unintelligent, and his faith, whatever its origins in conditioning and psychological necessity, has produced in him a genuine capacity for reflection. He has sat with the apparent paradox of a devout life that is rewarded with loss. He has tried to find the theological framework that explains why the man who barely tries is the one who gets the divine visitation, and the man who organizes his entire existence around the divine is met with silence. He has not, as far as the show reveals, found a satisfying answer. He has found patience with the question. He has found the capacity to continue inside the question without being destroyed by it. This may, in the end, be the truest form of his faith. Not the certainty of someone who knows the answers, but the endurance of someone who has decided that the questions are worth staying with. He comes out of the house at 6:30 in the morning. The air is Springfield's air. The flowers along the front of his house need attention today. He will give them attention. He will give everything the attention it requires. Because that is what he does. Because that is what he was made to do. Because the child who was chaos became the man who is care through a process he did not choose, in a situation he did not understand. He glances at Homer's house. The windows are dark. Homer is still asleep. This is the natural order of 6:30 on Evergreen Terrace. Ned will be tending his garden while Homer is asleep. Ned will have done more things before Homer's alarm goes off than Homer will do all day. And God will be quiet. And Ned will tend the garden anyway. The bar has been here longer than most of the other things on the street. Longer than the bowling alley that came and went. Longer than the various businesses that have occupied the storefronts on either side, each lasting a year or two before the peculiar economics of Springfield caught up with them. Moe's Tavern has outlasted them all. And the reason it has outlasted them is not that it is especially good at being a bar. It is that it has become, through sheer persistence and the accumulated weight of years, a kind of institution, a fixed point, a place that the regulars return to not primarily because they need a drink, but because the bar is where they are when they are not somewhere else, and that distinction has a value that is difficult to price but impossible to eliminate. Moe Sislak stands behind the bar, and he looks at the people in front of him, and he thinks about things he would not say out loud. This is his primary activity. The pouring of drinks is secondary. What Moe does, more than anything else he does, is witness. He is the keeper of the confidences of a group of men who would not know how to talk about their confidences anywhere else, who come to the bar because the bar is a context where certain kinds of speech are permitted, where things can be said in the context of drinking that could not be said in the context of sobriety, where the distance between a man and his own feelings becomes negotiable. Moe Sislak is a person of extraordinary complexity, hidden behind a presentation that is specifically designed to discourage anyone from noticing that the complexity is there. He is coarse and gruff and prone to threatening violence, and perpetually appearing on the verge of some kind of collapse. He is also, when the show is paying careful attention, a person of genuine emotional intelligence, tremendous loneliness, and a specific quality of sadness that is different from any other sadness in Springfield, because Moe's sadness is not the result of circumstances that can be changed. It is the result of who he is, and the world that exists for people who are who he is. The ugliness issue is where you have to start, because it is where the show starts and where it always returns. Moe's physical appearance is a running element of his characterization, and the show treats it with a lack of grace that has been both its most obvious and its most revealing choice. Moe is, within the logic of Springfield's visual universe, profoundly unattractive. This is presented as self-evident and as somehow the foundation of his difficulties. He cannot find love because he is ugly. He cannot access the emotional experiences he wants because his appearance disqualifies him. He is treated both by other characters and by the show itself as someone whose physical presentation has determined his social fate. The cruelty of this framing is that it is presented without irony. The show is not, in most episodes, critiquing the system that produces this outcome. It is simply using Moe's ugliness as the premise of his suffering in the way that a simpler comic universe uses such things as an established fact that generates situations. But underneath the framing is a portrait of a real kind of suffering. Moe wants companionship. He wants the particular form of intimacy that comes from being seen by another person and found worthwhile. He has tried, across many episodes, to find it. He has been in relationships that failed. He has had friendships that were tested. He has had moments of genuine connection that he has then, through some combination of fear and inadequacy and the specific self-sabotage of someone who does not believe he deserves what he wants, managed to undermine. The phone calls are their own story. The running gag of Bart calling the bar and asking for people with ridiculous names that Moe then announces to the tavern is one of the show's oldest and most durable comic devices. What is less often noted is the quality of Moe's responses when he realizes he has been pranked. The rage in those moments is outsized. It is not the proportionate reaction of someone who has been mildly annoyed. It is the reaction of someone who has been made to feel foolish, again, in front of other people, again, which touches something that is genuinely raw. Moe has a profound relationship with humiliation because he has experienced it systematically, in ways large and small, across a long lifetime, and the phone calls land exactly on the part of him that has been tenderized by all of it. His relationship with the regulars, Homer and Lenny and Carl and Barney, is one of the more interesting ensemble relationships the show sustains. These are not friendships built on shared values or compatible worldviews or mutual admiration. They are friendships built on shared geography and shared time, on the fact that these particular people have ended up in the same room, on the same stools, on a regular basis for long enough that the arrangement has acquired its own kind of meaning. This is actually how many real friendships work, And the show captures this specific quality of accidental community with more accuracy than it is usually given credit for. Mo cares about these people. He does not always show it in ways they would recognize as care. He is frequently hostile, frequently dismissive, frequently more interested in the problems of his bar than in the problems of his customers. But when it matters, when Homer or one of the others is in genuine trouble, Mo is present in a way that is not contingent on reciprocity or reward. He shows up because they are his people. They are the people he has, and Mo understands, with the clarity that comes from having experienced the alternative, that having people is not nothing. The backstory that the show has gradually assembled for Mo places him in a history that explains some of the sadness without fully accounting for all of it. He was, at some point in his past, a professional boxer. Not successful enough to be remembered fondly, but accomplished enough that he made it to a professional level, which means he was once someone whose body was an asset rather than a source of self-consciousness. He has spent much of his adult life running a bar that has been a financial disaster across many seasons, going bankrupt, being saved by various means, going bankrupt again in a cycle that mirrors the larger Springfield reset, but with a specifically economic texture. He has also, in certain episodes, been revealed to have unusual talents and depth that exist entirely outside what his daily presentation would suggest. He is, in some episodes, a genuinely gifted chef. He has demonstrated artistic sensibility. He has, on at least one occasion, been placed in a social context entirely outside his usual register and handled it with a grace that surprised everyone, including himself. These glimpses are always temporary. The show returns him to the bar and the gruffness and the loneliness as reliably as it returns everyone else to their default positions. But the glimpses accumulate into a picture of a person who is significantly more than what he allows himself to appear to be. The suicide attempts and the depression are handled by the show with varying degrees of seriousness across different episodes, and the varying degrees are themselves revealing. In some episodes, Mo's despair is played primarily for comedy, in the way that the show has a long history of treating adult male emotional suffering as inherently amusing when expressed awkwardly. In other episodes, particularly the ones where the writing has time to be careful about it, the despair is treated with genuine weight, as the expression of a man who has looked at his life and the trajectory it is on and found it inadequate in ways that feel unrepairable. There is a reading of Mo's bar as a kind of liminal space in Springfield's geography, a place that exists between the ordinary categories of the town's life. It is not a home. It is not a workplace in any conventional sense. It is a place where people go when they do not want to be somewhere else, and the person who maintains that space, who keeps it open and keeps the lights on and keeps the bottle stocked, is Mo. He is the keeper of the in-between. This is not a glamorous role. It is not a role that anyone aspires to and few people acknowledge, but it is, in its way, a necessary one. The town of Springfield needs a place where the in-between people, the people who are not quite at home anywhere, can be temporarily at home. And Mo provides it, without credit and often without thanks, because it is what he does, and because the bar is the only context in which Mo himself is not between things but is simply where he is. Under the radiation theory, Mo represents a particular kind of long-term exposure case. His physical appearance, which the show treats as a fixed and unchangeable fact of his existence, may not be genetic or purely congenital. Something about the accumulation of years in Springfield, in a building that filters the contaminated air of the town and serves drinks drawn from the contaminated water supply, may have contributed to a progressive physical change that Mo has simply lived inside for so long that he no longer marks the change. The bar as an institution of long-term low-level environmental exposure, Mo as its primary and most continuous subject. The coma theory gives Mo a particular function. He is the keeper of Homer's secrets. In the episodes where Homer comes to the bar and talks, Mo listens. He has heard more of Homer's interior life than almost anyone else, because the bar creates the conditions for speech that ordinary life does not. If the bar is Homer's dream, then Mo is the figure in the dream who absorbs what Homer cannot say to the people he most wants to say things to. He is the confessor in a world that does not have formal confession. He hears things and he keeps them. This is not glamorous either, but it is, again, necessary. He stands behind the bar at closing time. The regulars have gone home. The last glass has been wiped and set upside down on the shelf. The television above the bar is playing something nobody is watching anymore. a late-night program in the particular frequency of late night, which has a different quality from all other television, quieter and stranger, as if the night itself has changed the channel. Mo stands in the empty bar, and the empty bar stands around him and outside. Springfield is whatever Springfield is at this hour. The plant's cooling towers are lit from below by a light that has no good explanation. The streets are quiet. Somewhere, in a house with a cracked sidewalk, someone is still sleeping. Mo wipes down the bar one more time even though it is already clean. He turns off the lights. He goes upstairs, if he has upstairs, or through the back, into whatever space he occupies outside the context of the bar, which the show has rarely shown us with any clarity. He is the bartender at the end of the world, and tomorrow he will open the bar again, and the regulars will return, and he will listen, and the world will not have ended after all. It never does in Springfield. His office is very tidy. This is the first thing you notice about it, if you are Bart Simpson being sent to it for the 1100th time, which Bart has been often enough to have cataloged its contents with some precision. The desk is organized. The files are where they should be. The window looks out over the schoolyard in a way that provides good sightlines over the main areas where discipline problems are most likely to develop, which is a detail that suggests the office was arranged by someone who thinks systematically about the relationship between physical space and institutional control. There is a photograph of Agnes Skinner on the desk. Her expression in the photograph is the expression she uses for most things, which is a compressed mixture of expectation and disappointment. The man behind the desk is Seymour Skinner. He is the principal of Springfield Elementary School. He has been the principal of Springfield Elementary School for 20 years. He is a Vietnam War veteran. He has a complicated and slightly strangling relationship with his mother. He is the ongoing institutional adversary of Bart Simpson, which is a role he takes seriously even though the adversarial relationship has never actually produced any lasting consequence for either party. He is also, as Springfield discovered and then collectively voted to forget, not Seymour Skinner at all. He is Armin Tamzarian, a man who was born under different circumstances into a different life and who, through a sequence of events that were not entirely within his control, came to inhabit someone else's identity so completely that the difference eventually became irrelevant. Not because it stopped being true, because Springfield decided the truth was less useful than the lie. The Principal and the Pauper, the Season 9 episode that revealed this, remains one of the most divisive in the show's history, consistently placed near the bottom of fan rankings, frequently cited as evidence that the show had lost its way, used as shorthand for the moment when The Simpsons stopped caring about its own internal consistency. Harry Shearer, who voices the character, expressed his displeasure with the storyline publicly and directly. But the hostility toward the episode is itself interesting, because the episode is not doing something incoherent. It is doing something the audience found intolerable, which is not the same thing. What the episode does is reveal that one of the show's most established secondary characters is a fiction. Not the character exactly, but the identity. Everything Springfield knows about Seymour Skinner is something that Seymour Skinner is not. He did not have the Vietnam experience he claims. He did not have the relationship to Agnes that he performs. He was not born into the life he describes. He is a man named Armin Tamzarian, a former street criminal from a bad situation who found himself in the right place at the wrong time and discovered that someone else's name fit him better than his own. And Springfield had 20 years to notice this and did not notice it. 20 years of parent-teacher conferences and school events and community functions and budget meetings, and at no point did any of the assembled parents and teachers and town officials look at Seymour Skinner and think something was wrong with the profile. This is, on one level, a commentary on how little attention people pay to the people they interact with institutionally, how thoroughly the uniform of a role absorbs the person wearing it until the role is all anyone sees. But it is also a commentary on the specific opacity of Springfield. The town that has decided not to notice things does not notice things. The school principal was an imposter for 20 years, and the mechanism that should have caught this, the normal human attentiveness to the people in one's immediate community, failed completely. When the truth emerges, the town's decision is swift and unanimous. They do not want the truth. The truth is disruptive. The truth requires them to revise 20 years of memory, to acknowledge that the person they thought they knew was a construct, to deal with the actual Seymour Skinner, who is present and real and understandably troubled by having returned from a prisoner of war camp to find someone else living his life. The actual Seymour Skinner is inconvenient. Tamzarian, who has been Skinner for 20 years and has, in that time, actually done the work and built the relationships, is the version Springfield knows and is comfortable with. So they vote. They vote to keep the lie. A judge issues a legal decree that Tamzarian is Skinner. The real Skinner is put on a train and removed from the town, with the additional instruction that it is illegal to mention this event again under penalty of torture. The community does not just choose the lie. It codifies the choice. It gives the lie legal standing. It makes the truth criminal. This is the episode in its most literal form, and this is why the fans hated it. Not because it was badly made, though it has weaknesses. Because it was saying something about Springfield and about the audience's relationship to Springfield that the audience was not prepared to hear. The thing it was saying was this: you have been watching a show for 9 years in which the main premise has been that the established facts of this world can be trusted. The characters are who they say they are. The history they have is the history they have. When the show tells you something, you can build on that. You can feel comfortable with it. It is yours to carry forward. And now the show is telling you that Seymour Skinner is not Seymour Skinner, which means either the show was wrong about him for 9 years, or it is wrong about him now, and either way, the foundation has shifted. The audience's rage was the rage of someone who has had a trust violated. And the trust that was violated was not just the trust in the show's continuity. It was the trust in the stability of the world, the implicit promise that the world you have been shown is the world that actually exists, which is, of course, exactly the promise that Springfield has been violating every single episode on a larger and more consequential scale, without the audience noticing. Because the things Springfield violates the trust about are not just character backstories. They are the big things. The environmental contamination, the institutionalized corruption, the medical impossibility of Burns's continued existence, the floating timeline, the resets that follow every catastrophe as if the catastrophe never happened. The principal and the pauper made the audience feel what the characters of Springfield should, by rights, feel every single day. The feeling of discovering that the world you trusted was not the world that actually was. The feeling that the ground you were standing on was not solid. And the audience's response mirrored Springfield's response almost exactly. They rejected the revelation. They voted to keep the comfortable version. They declared the episode bad and moved on. Back to the Springfield they knew. Back to the Skinner they recognized. Back to the implicit agreement that the show's established facts could be trusted. Springfield does not forget because its residents are cognitively impaired, though they may be. Springfield forgets because forgetting is the social compact. And the audience of The Simpsons is part of that compact whether they agreed to it consciously or not. Armin Tamzarian is still behind that desk. The photograph of Agnes is still on it. The window still has good sightlines over the schoolyard. He is still Seymour Skinner in every way that Springfield will permit him to be. The real Seymour Skinner is still on a train somewhere, or perhaps arrived somewhere, perhaps built another life in another town that did not already have a version of him. The man in the office does his job. He maintains the school with the systematic care of someone who has built his entire sense of self around a role that was not originally his. He is, in a way, the most honest metaphor for Springfield's relationship to identity that the show has ever produced. He is a town that is not what it says it is, inhabited by people who are not quite what they appear to be, running on an identity borrowed from someone else and codified by legal decree. The truth is on a train. The lie runs the school. And neither the students nor the parents nor the teachers will ever bring it up again. He is at the window of the Springfield retirement castle, and the light outside is the afternoon light, which has a quality in late autumn that makes everything look slightly more itself than usual. The tree across the parking lot has gone yellow, and the yellow is vivid against the sky. Abe Simpson watches the tree without urgency, the way old people watch things, with the particular patience that comes not from having nowhere to go, but from having arrived at the understanding that going places is not the primary source of meaning. He has been at this window many times. He has watched that tree through many seasons. He is watching it now. Abraham Simpson is Homer's father. He is also, depending on how you read the available evidence, either a man who made a series of genuinely terrible choices under impossible circumstances and has lived with the weight of them for decades, or a man who chose his own comfort and his own survival over the well-being of his family at a critical moment and has spent the rest of his life constructing a narrative that makes that choice bearable. These two readings are not mutually exclusive. And that is what makes Abe Simpson one of the more genuinely complicated figures in the show's extended cast. The lie about Mona is where it all begins. He told Homer that his mother was dead. He maintained this lie for over 2 decades. He showed Homer a gravestone that belonged to Walt Whitman and allowed his son to believe it was his mother's resting place. He watched Homer grow up in the particular emotional landscape that is created when a child believes he was the kind of son his mother chose to leave, and he did not correct the landscape. He let it set. He let it become the foundation of Homer's personality. Why he did this has been the subject of various explanations across the show's run, and the explanations are not entirely consistent. One version suggests he was trying to protect Homer, that telling him the truth about Mona's situation, that she was alive but being actively pursued by federal authorities due to her activist past and Burns's relentless pursuit of her, would have put Homer in danger, would have given a child information he could not safely hold. Another version suggests that Abe was simply unable to hold the complexity of the truth, that admitting Mona had chosen activism over their family was more than his ego could manage, that the story of the dead wife was less painful than the story of the wife who left. A third version, less sympathetic and perhaps more accurate, is that Abe was a man of limited emotional vocabulary and considerable self-protectiveness who chose the path of least resistance and told a lie that was easier to maintain than the truth. The deal with Burns adds another layer to this portrait. When Burns committed a crime that Grandpa Simpson discovered, Abe struck a deal. In exchange for his silence, Homer would be guaranteed lifelong employment at the plant regardless of performance. This arrangement, which Homer was never told about, meant that Burns effectively purchased the complicity of Homer's father in the ongoing operation of an institution that was causing measurable harm to the surrounding population, including to the Simpson family directly. Abe took the deal. He did not tell Burns to face justice. He did not attempt to find another way to protect Homer's future that did not involve binding his son's life to the enterprise of the man who had destroyed Homer's mother. He took the deal. And he said nothing. This is the choice that sits at the center of Abe Simpson's life. The choice that everything else is arranged around, like furniture arranged to face away from a damaged wall. He knows what he did. The show has given him moments of awareness about it. Moments where the clarity comes through the fog of old age and he can see, briefly and painfully, the shape of the thing he built and the cost it has had. And then the clarity passes, the fog returns. He tells a story to whoever is nearby. A long, digressing story about something that happened decades ago in a different America. Something about the war, or about a president, or about a job he used to have, and the story goes somewhere nobody expected and ends somewhere it did not begin. And the point, if it had one, has been lost by the time it arrives. The stories are real. This is important. The specific details of Abe's many stories, their particular texture and the quality of his confidence in them, are not the ravings of a completely deteriorated mind. He remembers things. He remembers them vividly. He is a man who has lived through an extraordinary amount of American history, and he has the actual memories to prove it, memories that are sharp and particular and full of detail in a way that the general cognitive fog cannot account for. What has deteriorated is not the memory but the context. The framework that would allow him to understand which of his memories are relevant to the present moment, which details are worth sharing, and which belong to a world that no longer exists in any form that the people around him can access. He lives in the past with a clarity that makes the present difficult to navigate, and the result looks like dementia, but maybe something more like displacement, the experience of someone who is more fully alive in a time that has passed than in the time that is currently occurring. This reading makes Abe sympathetic in a specific way. He is not simply a man whose mind has failed. He is a man whose history is so present to him that the present has become thin and uncertain by comparison. The things he did, the choices he made, the consequences he generated across the decades of his life, those things are vivid and immediate to him even as the details of today fade by afternoon. The retirement castle is its own study. It is where Springfield puts the people it has finished with, the people who have served their purpose in the active economy of the town, and who now exist in a category that the show sometimes treats with affection and sometimes treats with the particular casual cruelty that organized society directs. Toward the old, the residents of the retirement castle are not fully visible to Springfield's daily life. They occupy a space that is adjacent to the town but not quite of it. where the rules are different and the authority structures have the particular quality of institutions designed for people who are assumed to be unable to advocate for themselves. Abe has been there for most of the show's run. He moved there when Homer was still establishing himself on Evergreen Terrace, partly because Homer's household could not absorb him, and partly because Abe himself, in his way, was ready to be somewhere with other old people, somewhere the expectations of daily life were scaled to what he could provide. He has made the retirement castle into something approximating home, which is its own kind of testament to his adaptability or his resignation, depending on how you read it. His relationship with Homer is complicated by everything that has gone before it. Homer loves his father with the love you feel for someone who was the only parent you had, a love that is real and unconditional and also threaded through with the accumulated weight of every way that parent failed you, every need that went unmet, every question that went unanswered. Homer forgives Abe repeatedly, in the way that children forgive parents, not through any act of deliberate forgiveness but through the ongoing choice to maintain the relationship, to show up, to be the son. Even when being the son involves sitting with a man who tells the same stories and forgets he has told them and asks the same questions he asked last week. Abe, for his part, loves Homer in a way that is genuine and also sometimes expressed as a kind of disappointed expectation. He is not always kind about Homer's limitations. He has, in various episodes, expressed something close to embarrassment about the adult his son became, the kind of embarrassment that says more about the father than the son, because the adult Homer became was shaped in no small part by the conditions Abe created and maintained. The war stories deserve a moment. Abe fought in World War II, and this is not a comedic fact. This is a real one, a fact that carries real weight. He was a young man in a terrible situation who did something that generations of people since have been told to revere, and that he himself carries with a mixture of genuine pride and the complicated texture of memory that belongs to anyone who has seen what war actually looks like. His war stories are funny because of the digressive nature of their telling. They are also, in the moments when the show handles them carefully, genuine. He was there. He did those things. The world was different, and he was young, and he came home carrying things he did not have words for, in a time when the words were not available to him. He is sitting at the window of the Springfield retirement castle, and the tree across the parking lot has gone yellow. He is watching it. He has been watching it for a while, and he will watch it for a while more. Somewhere across town, his son is at the plant, or on the couch, or getting into the kind of difficulty that will resolve itself by the next episode without lasting consequences. He watches the tree. The afternoon light holds. He thinks about something, though what he thinks about is between him and the window. There is something he should have said. There was something, somewhere back in the long sequence of years, that he should have said out loud instead of carrying. He knows this. On good days, he knows it clearly. On other days, it blurs into the general fog of time past and choices made, and the enormous distance between who you intended to be and who you ended up being. The light on the tree is very beautiful. He watches it until it changes. Springfield is not only its central family, it is a town, and the town is populated by people who have their own stories running just below the surface of the main action, visible in the margins, showing up when the plot requires them, and then retreating into the background that is really their primary residence. These people are not minor characters in any meaningful sense. They are the context that gives the central story its shape. They are the town that makes Springfield a town rather than just a house on Evergreen Terrace. And when you spend time with them individually, when you stop treating them as backdrop and start treating them as subjects, what you find is a collection of people each carrying a particular version of the weight that Springfield distributes. Let us take them one by one, slowly, the way the night takes things, unhurried and observant. Sideshow Bob. Robert Underdunk, Terwilliger Jr., is the character who should not work as well as he does, because the premise of his recurring role is inherently comic, a sophisticated, operatically theatrical criminal mastermind being repeatedly outwitted by a 10-year-old boy, and yet the show has managed, across his many appearances, to make him genuinely interesting. The key is that Sideshow Bob is the one character in Springfield who has fully and accurately diagnosed his own situation. He knows that Bart Simpson is his nemesis. He knows that every plan he makes will be undone by this child. He knows, somewhere beneath the soaring bass baritone and the Gilbert and Sullivan references and the theatrical grandiosity, that he is trapped in a loop that the thing he most wants to do will not be permitted to happen, and that the person standing in his way is a child who is not even trying to stop him in any sophisticated sense, but who simply is, in some fundamental way, his opposite. This is the darkest reading of Sideshow Bob. He is not simply a villain frustrated by circumstance. He is a man who has achieved everything that his particular combination of intelligence and ambition was supposed to achieve. He is educated, he is cultured, he is genuinely sophisticated in ways that Springfield does not reward and sometimes actively resents. He has talents. He has, in the episodes where the show is generous with him, real depth of feeling, a genuine capacity for love and loyalty, and the kind of aesthetic passion that can make a person feel that life is worth the trouble of living. And all of it, every gift, every quality, every accomplishment, has been bent toward the destruction of a child. This is the sentence that the show never quite says plainly, but that is legible in every Sideshow Bob episode. He is a person of extraordinary capacity who has organized his life around a grievance against a 10-year-old, and the organizing is so complete that it has crowded out everything else. He cannot be who he might have been, because who he is has become defined entirely by who he wants to harm. The nemesis relationship has swallowed him. The cactus person distinction is important here. Sideshow Bob is conscious of his trap in a way that the other characters are not. He has full awareness of the loop. He has articulated it. He has tried to step outside it. In the episodes where he chooses reform, where he attempts to build a life outside the gravitational field of his obsession. And he always returns. The obsession is stronger than the choice, which makes him, in the most sympathetic reading, a portrait of how completely a person can be organized around a wound, how the wound can become more real to them than any of the things that exist outside it. His relationship with his brother Cecil adds another dimension. Cecil is the person who was supposed to be Krusty's sidekick, the one who had the talent for slapstick that Bob did not, who was overlooked in favor of his more famous sibling. Cecil's grudge against Bob mirrors Bob's grudge against Bart in its structure, a life organized around a wound, a person defined by what was taken from them. The Terwilliger family is a family of people who carry their injuries as primary identities, who have found that the injury is the most stable thing about them, the most reliable anchor in a world that otherwise provides very little to hold on to. The opera he wants to sing, the literature he quotes, the life he might have had in a world where his gifts were received in a context that knew what to do with them. These things are real and they are present in him, and they exist alongside the homicidal obsession in a way that makes the whole combination genuinely tragic. He is a waste. Not in the pejorative sense, but in the literal sense. A person of real gifts living a life that squanders them through choices that were made possible by wounds that were not entirely his fault. Now Krusty the Clown, Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerucham Krustovsky, which is a name the show delivers as a joke but which carries the weight of a history. He is the son of a rabbi, which establishes immediately that there was a framework for his life, a tradition and a community and a role that was prepared for him, and that he rejected it. The rejection was not casual. Krusty wanted to be a comedian. He wanted to make people laugh, which is a desire that most people find reasonable and even admirable, but which in the context of the Krustovsky family was a rejection not just of a profession but of an entire way of being. His father did not understand it. His father could not forgive it. For a long time, and the distance between them became a geography that Krusty lived inside. The knowledge that the person whose approval he most wanted had withheld it, and that the performance he had built his life around could never quite reach the one audience he actually needed. He is a bad person who is not entirely bad. This is the show's most consistent characterization of him. He smokes too much. He gambles beyond his means and the means of people around him. He has been, across many episodes, negligent, irresponsible, dishonest, and careless with other people's well-being in ways that cause real harm. He is also in certain episodes capable of genuine kindness, genuine remorse, genuine connection with the children he performs for, in a way that goes beyond the mercenary transaction of entertainer and audience. He loves his work in a way that is real. The love does not redeem everything else, but it is real. The father-son reconciliation, when it comes, is one of the show's more emotionally honest moments. The rabbi who did not understand his son's choices comes, eventually, to understand them. And the understanding comes too late in the sense that all such understandings do, after years have been consumed by the distance, and also exactly in time, in the sense that it arrives before the end, before the opportunity is gone. Krusty, receiving his father's approval, is a man who has been carrying a specific weight for so long that the setting down of it takes several attempts. He does not know immediately how to be someone whose father is proud of him because he has been someone whose father was not proud of him for so many years that the identity had calcified. He is still performing. He will always be performing. The clown makeup goes on every day, and the show goes on every day, and the cigarette comes out afterward, and the gambling debts accumulate, and Springfield watches and laughs. But underneath the grease paint is a man who once just wanted to make people laugh and found that the wanting was more complicated than the doing. Apu Nahasa P. Mapetalon, the proprietor of the Quick E-Mart, has, in his more carefully written episodes, a life of considerable complexity that extends far beyond his function, as the person who sells Homer the things Homer is not supposed to have. He has a doctorate in computer science. He has a family of 8 children, which the show introduced as a comedic premise and which the show's better episodes acknowledged is a circumstance with real weight, real joy, and real exhaustion, and the specific negotiation of a life that contains more people than the space around it was designed for. He has been in Springfield for many years through a process that was not simple and has built, in the particular manner of people who build things in places that are not the places they expected to build, a life that is genuinely his, that fits him in the ways that matter even when it requires accommodations. His relationship to the Quick E-Mart is its own meditation on the relationship between identity and labor, on what it means when the work you do becomes so thoroughly associated with who you are that the distinction blurs. He has talked about the store with the care of someone whose investment in it is not purely economic. He has also, in various episodes, expressed the weight of being the most identifiable South Asian character in a show watched by hundreds of millions of people, the weight of being a representative of a community in a way that was not invited and is not always comfortable. The cultural criticism of Apu's characterization is a real conversation and not one that this script can fully engage with in this context. What it can say is that the show at its best has treated him as a full person, with a history and a family and an interior life, and that the episodes where it does this are among the ones that hold up most honestly. Barney Gumble. He is the tragedy that is allowed to not be entirely a tragedy. Barney is Homer's oldest friend, which is itself a fact worth sitting with. The person who has known Homer the longest, who was present at the formation of the friendship that has lasted across their entire adult lives, is a man who has lost most of his adult life to alcoholism. Barney is funny. His situation is also genuinely sad in a way that the show sometimes honors and sometimes steps over. What the show has done most carefully with Barney is the episodes that show him without alcohol. The episodes where Barney gets sober reveal, with some regularity, a person of unexpected capacity. He has, in sobriety, demonstrated intelligence, sensitivity, genuine skill in domains he had no apparent access to while drinking. He became a filmmaker in one of these episodes, producing work of real emotional power. The talent was there all along. The drinking covered it, the way fog covers a landscape. The landscape did not go away, it was just hidden. His returns to drinking are presented as inevitable by the show's logic. He gets sober. Something happens. He returns. The reset pulls him back. But the episodes of clarity are proof of the person who might have existed under different circumstances, in a different environment, with different tools, with a version of the support that might have allowed the sobriety to hold. Under the radiation theory, Barney's drinking is both cause and consequence of a particular kind of neurological damage. He drinks partly because the environment has compromised his system in ways that make the relief of alcohol difficult to forego, and the drinking accelerates the damage the environment began. He is in a feedback loop of the most personal kind, and the feedback has been running for so long that the distance between cause and consequence has collapsed. Chief Wiggum, Ralph's father, Springfield's chief of police. A man whose professional incompetence is so total and so sustained that it has the quality of something cultivated rather than simply allowed. The Springfield Police Department under Wiggum's leadership has, across 36 years, failed to solve, prevent, or meaningfully respond to an extraordinary range of crimes, disasters, and clear violations of law. Burns has faced essentially no regulatory or criminal consequences for the operation of a facility with 342 safety violations. The shooting of Mr. Burns was solved with a conclusion that the available evidence does not support. Environmental crimes that have been conducted in open view of the community have gone uninvestigated. Wiggum is not smart. This is the show's basic characterization of him, and it is not unkind about it in the way that it is sometimes unkind about Homer's intelligence. Wiggum's lack of intelligence is presented as natural and complete, as simply the cognitive baseline of the man, without the backstory of crayon removal or radiation exposure that gives Homer's fog a different character. But consider the structural function of a police chief who cannot do his job in a town where the most powerful entity is actively engaged in conduct that would not survive competent policing. Wiggum's incompetence is Burns's protection. Whether by design or by selection or by the simple accumulation of years in a town where the normal mechanisms of accountability do not function, the person responsible for law enforcement in Springfield is precisely the person least capable of providing it. This is not a coincidence that the show has set up and then walked back. It is a consistent feature of Springfield's landscape. The protection of Burns is structural, and it is maintained, among other things, by a police department that cannot detect it. Smithers, already discussed in the Burns section, bears a final mention here because his position in the ensemble is unique. He is the character who knows the most. He knows Burns's medical situation. He knows the operations of the plant. He has been present for decades of institutional decisions and institutional crimes. He is, in a functioning society with functional institutions, the most important potential witness to the full scope of what Burns has done. His silence is not incidental. His silence is the hinge that holds Burns's entire operation together. The love he feels for Burns, whatever its specific form and whatever Burns's awareness of it, is the mechanism of the silence. It is not fear, exactly, though there may be elements of that. It is something closer to the specific vulnerability of love, the way that loving someone arranges you so that their continuation feels more important than your own principles. Smithers does not blow the whistle. He schedules the treatments. He manages the calendar. He makes sure Burns makes it to the next week, and the next, and the next. And Springfield continues. The constellation of these people, held together by geography and history and the invisible threads of a contaminated environment and a floating timeline, and the collective agreement not to know what they all, in some layer of themselves, already know. They are the town. They are what makes Springfield a place rather than a premise. They are the proof that something genuinely happened here, across 36 years, that has more weight and more darkness and more sadness and more grace than any simple summary of it can contain. The background goes dark. The street empties out. The lights in the windows go off, one by one. There is a moment, late in the evening, when a particular kind of small American town goes very quiet. The traffic stops. The businesses have been closed for hours. The only lights are the street lights and the occasional window, and, in this particular town, the orange glow that comes from the direction of the plant, which never goes dark because the plant never goes dark, because the plant is always running, always generating, always doing what it does to the water and the air and the people who live close to both. In that quiet, Springfield looks like any other place. The streets could be any streets. The houses could be any houses. The storefronts and the school and the church and the retirement castle and the bar could belong to any town in any state in any region of a country that is full of towns like this. Places that exist between the notable places, places that are not destinations but origins, places where people live their actual lives instead of the lives they perform for an audience. Springfield has no fixed location. This is a fact the show has maintained across its entire run, with a consistency that, once you decide to read it as intentional rather than careless, becomes something more interesting than either geography or comedy. Matt Groening named the town after Springfield, Oregon, and then the show continued placing the town everywhere else simultaneously. In a state bordered by Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky, depending on which episode, on a coastline, in a landlocked heartland, near the Canadian border, within sight of Mexico. The show has given Springfield every American geography and then given it none of them, ensuring that no matter how many clues accumulate, the question of where this place is remains unanswered. This is the design. The town that could be anywhere is the town that belongs to everyone. The town that has every American geography simultaneously is the town that contains every American experience, every version of what it means to live inside the middle of this particular country in this particular era. Springfield is a composite, a Frankenstein geography assembled from every American landscape that ever appeared on a television screen, from the imagery of the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt and New England and the Pacific Northwest and the Deep South, all layered over each other into a place that is somehow legible as a specific place, even though it is impossible as a specific place. This is a sophisticated artistic choice presented as a running joke, and it works the way sophisticated things sometimes do, by being so thorough in its commitment to its own impossibility that it eventually transcends the impossibility and becomes real in a different register. Springfield feels real. This is the most important thing about it. Despite the floating geography and the floating timeline and the yellow skin and the four fingers and the three-eyed fish and the nuclear plant that has been cited for more safety violations than any fictional facility in the history of television, Springfield feels real. It feels like a place you might have grown up in, or lived in, or driven through, or dreamed about when you were homesick for somewhere you could not quite name. That feeling is not an accident. It is what the show was built to produce. The nuclear plant is the town's center in a sense that goes beyond the physical. The plant is not just where Homer works. It is the institution that organizes Springfield's economy, its social structure, its relationship to power, its relationship to its own health. The plant sits in the background of Springfield like a fixed point in a floating geometry, the one thing that does not change location as the other pieces of the town rearrange themselves around it. The cooling towers are always in the skyline. The plant is always there. The orange glow is always visible on a clear night from certain parts of town. The plant is Springfield's spine and Springfield's disease and Springfield's reason for existing in the same motion. This is the thing that the radiation theory, the coma theory, the collective denial theory, and the immortality theory all return to when you follow them far enough. The plant. The plant is the cause of the mutations that mark Springfield's residents as different from the people in other towns. The plant is the institution that Burns has used to extract decades of economic control over the community. The plant is what Homer's employment at has exposed him to for his entire adult life, contributing to the cognitive fog that keeps him from understanding the architecture of his own suffering. The plant is the background hum of everything that is wrong in Springfield, the source of the contamination that the show has been depicting, in various forms, since Blinky the three-eyed fish first appeared in Season 2, and the town cannot remove it because the town cannot function without it. This is the specific quality of Springfield's trap. It is not simply dependent on an institution that harms it. It is genuinely unable to imagine its own existence outside that dependency. The power plant provides electricity. The plant employs a significant portion of the working-age population. Burns's money funds the political structures of the town, directly or through influence, in ways that have made the entire apparatus of municipal governance a subsidiary of the plant's interests. Springfield cannot turn off the reactor because turning off the reactor would mean losing the power, the jobs, the money, and the influence simultaneously in a cascade that would leave the town unable to function in any recognizable way. This is not unique to Springfield. This is the shape of many real American communities, places where a single employer or a single industry became so thoroughly integrated into the community's identity and economy that the community could not conceive of itself without it, even when the industry was making the community sick, even when the long-term cost was demonstrably higher than the short-term benefit. The company town is a real American phenomenon, and Springfield is its apotheosis, its most extreme and most absurd and most honest form. The geography floats because the story is not about any specific place. It is about all of them. It is about the condition of being an American community organized around a single dominant institution that is also the community's primary source of harm. That condition does not belong to one state or one region. It belongs to the American interior, to the places between the coasts where the economy has always been more precarious and the power more concentrated and the alternatives more limited. The collective denial that the principal and the pauper episode makes explicit is what allows this arrangement to persist. The town votes, again and again, in ways both formal and informal, to not know what it knows, to not see what is in front of it, to not ask the questions whose answers would require action that the community is not prepared to take. The three-eyed fish was data. Nobody ran the follow-up study. The dome was containment. Nobody asked what had caused the contamination that required containment. The skeletons in the basement of the plant were evidence. Nobody opened the investigation. Springfield maintains its own status quo through a sustained collective act of not looking, and the town is set up in a way that makes not looking the rational choice for individuals, even when it is catastrophic as a collective strategy. If you look, if you see clearly, If you start asking the questions that the available evidence points toward, what you find requires you to challenge Burns. And challenging Burns means economic consequences that you will bear alone while the rest of the town, which did not look, continues to receive its paychecks and its electricity and its functional, if terrible schools, and its functioning, if incompetent police force. The rational thing, for any individual resident, is to not look. And the sum of all those individual rational choices is a town that has collectively destroyed its capacity to see itself clearly. This is not a critique that belongs only to Springfield. This is a description of a structural problem in communities organized around dependencies that cannot be challenged without collective action, and collective action requires a level of coordination and a willingness to accept short-term individual cost for long-term collective benefit that is, historically, very difficult to sustain. Springfield cannot sustain it. Springfield has never tried to sustain it. Springfield votes instead to keep the lie, to expel the truth teller, to update the official version of events every time reality becomes too inconvenient, and to return, every episode, to the reset that allows them to continue. The floating timeline is the largest and most comprehensive expression of this. Nobody ages, nobody grows, nobody graduates or retires or dies of old age or moves away and stays away. The permanent present of Springfield is a community-wide commitment to a form of stasis that is not natural but is sustained by every force in the environment, from the contamination that alters biology to the denial that alters memory, to the economic dependency that prevents change to the legal mechanisms that criminalize truth when truth becomes inconvenient. The show has been describing this for 36 years, not through dramatic revelations or heavy-handed exposition, through the quiet accumulation of detail, the three-eyed fish, the 342 violations, the cracked sidewalk on Evergreen Terrace that nobody has ever fixed, the skeletons in the basement, the billionaire who glows in the dark, the baby who shot a man and kept the secret, the principal who is not who he says he is, the police chief who cannot do his job, the bartender who hears everything and says nothing, the father who is dreaming, maybe, in a hospital bed somewhere, while his family waits in a simulation built from his love and his longing and the specific desperation of someone who has found the one thing worth dreaming about and cannot wake up enough to lose it. All of this is Springfield. All of it at once, without contradiction, because in Springfield, contradiction is just how the town breathes. It is the sound the town makes when it is functioning correctly. The normal hum of a place that has learned to hold irreconcilable things together through sheer force of collective will and the particular adaptations of people who have been shaped by their environment into something that can survive, inside conditions that should not be survivable. Springfield, Oregon, and Springfield, Kansas, and Springfield, Illinois, and Springfield, Missouri, and every Springfield in every state of the Union, and none of them and all of them, and the Springfield, that exists nowhere on a map because the town was never about a location. It was always about a condition. The condition of being ordinary in a world that has quietly broken something fundamental and needs everyone to agree not to notice. The condition of loving the people you love with your whole impaired, contaminated, fog-wrapped heart. The condition of going home at the end of every episode to the same house on the same street in the same impossible town and finding them there, the family, your family, the one you cannot imagine living without, and cannot quite reach, and keep dreaming of anyway. The cooling towers glow orange against the night sky. The plant is running. It is always running. The water in the pipes carries what it carries. The air moves through the windows that have been left open because the evening is mild. In a house on Evergreen Terrace, someone is still awake. The television is on. And Springfield is exactly as it has always been. Conclusion: the loop that holds us. The night has moved along while we have been in Springfield. The particular quality of darkness has shifted from the hard dark of the middle hours to the softer, beginning to lighten dark that comes before the first light. When the sky is still black but carries somewhere in it the faint suggestion of what is coming. If you have been listening this whole time, you have done something. You have stayed. You have traveled through this town and these people and these theories, and you are still here, still somewhere warm and horizontal, maybe already at the edge of sleep, maybe already past it. There is something worth saying, before the show fully closes, about why these characters hold us the way they do, why the theories multiply, why the questions keep being asked even after official answers have been provided. Why the show, which has been running longer than most of its current audience has been alive, still generates this quality of attention and analysis and genuine emotional engagement. Part of it is the show itself, which is genuinely extraordinary in its ambitions and its execution across its best years. But part of it is something the show tapped into that is bigger than any specific television program, something about the particular family it chose to put at the center of its world, and what that family represents. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie Simpson are, in the final reading, the version of the American family that the culture has decided it most needs to see. Not the aspirational version. Not the version that has resolved its contradictions into something clean and admirable. The broken version. The one that keeps going not because it has figured out how to go correctly, but because the love inside it is sufficient to the task of continuing, even when continuing is difficult and the direction is unclear. Homer is every person who was given less than they deserved and built a life with the remainder. Marge is every person whose devotion has gone unrecognized because it was so reliable that it stopped being visible. Bart is every person who learned that disruption was the only currency available to them and spent it lavishly because it was all they had. Lisa is every person who could see clearly in a place that punished clarity and kept their eyes open anyway. And Maggie is every person who understood, very early, that the world did not have room for them to speak, and who stored everything they had to say somewhere interior and private and safe, waiting. We trapped them in the loop. We built the walls and we watched to make sure they hold. Because if they age, if the children grow, if the show ends, something about the version of ourselves we have stored in Springfield ends with it. The version of us that was young and watching that first couch gag and laughing at things we could not entirely explain. The version of us that found in this specific family permission to be imperfect, to be chaotic, to love badly and mean it anyway. The plant is still running. The cooling towers are still lit from below with that orange light that has no good explanation. The three-eyed fish are still in the water. The skeletons are still in the basement. The billionaire is still in his office, fingers steepled, looking out over the town he has managed for longer than the town has been alive. The baby is still in the playpen. The principal is still behind his desk. The bartender is still wiping down the counter. The old man is still at the window watching the tree. And on the couch, in the house with the cracked sidewalk that nobody has ever fixed, in the town that exists everywhere and nowhere, in the loop that we press play on every time we start an episode, Homer Simpson is watching television. He is holding a beer. He is comfortable in the specific way of someone who has everything he wanted in the version of life that was available to him, and who has chosen, deliberately and repeatedly and with full consciousness of the choice, to want exactly this. Maybe the family is upstairs. Maybe they have gone to bed. Maybe it is one of those evenings where the house has the particular quality of peace that comes when everyone is where they are supposed to be and nothing has gone wrong and the evening is just the evening. Unremarkable and soft and sufficient. Homer watches his television. The credits will come soon. The episode will end, and then it will begin again. It always does. That is the whole point. The broad architecture of Homer's tragedy has already been sketched. The absent mother, the silent father, the deal made without his knowledge or consent, the crayon, the radiation, the deliberate maintenance of his incompetence as a workforce management strategy. These are the large structural elements, the beams and the load-bearing walls of the story. But there is an interior to Homer Simpson that the structural analysis does not fully capture, an emotional geography that the show has mapped, slowly and obliquely, across its better episodes, and that is worth spending more time with before we move further into the people around him. Consider Homer's relationship to beauty. Not aesthetic beauty in any sophisticated sense. Homer does not engage with art or music or literature in ways that would be recognizable as cultural appreciation. But Homer has a genuine and consistent response to certain kinds of loveliness that the show captures in small, quiet moments that are easy to miss because they happen in the margins of episodes that have louder things to talk about. The way the light comes through the kitchen window in the morning and falls on a particular section of the counter and makes the formica look almost warm. The smell of whatever Marge is cooking, not evaluated as food, not anticipated as sustenance, just received. The smell itself as an experience. The way Springfield looks from the top of the water tower on a clear day, the town spread out below, ordinary and specific and his. Homer has a relationship to his own life that is richer than his cognitive limitations might suggest, and it lives below language. He cannot describe what he feels when he holds Maggie. He cannot articulate the specific quality of what it is to sit on his couch on a Sunday evening with the family arranged around him and the television on and nowhere to be until morning. He has no vocabulary for these things, but he has the experience of them, fully and without reservation, the way animals have their experiences, without the mediation of language, present in the sensation itself. This is both his greatest limitation and his most distinctive quality. He is not able to think his way through his feelings. He simply has his feelings, large and undistilled and sometimes overwhelming, and his behavioral responses to them tend to be proportionate to the feeling, rather than appropriate to the context, which is why joy sometimes expresses as recklessness, and fear sometimes expresses as hostility, and love sometimes expresses as strangling. The feeling is not wrong, the calibration is off. Under the coma theory, this interior richness takes on a different valence. If Homer is dreaming, the dream is not full of the kind of logical narrative that waking consciousness produces. It is full of sensation and association and the particular irrational connections that the dreaming mind makes between things that do not logically belong together. Homer's dream Springfield is organized around feeling rather than logic, which is why the geography shifts and the rules change and nothing that happens has lasting consequences. Because consequences are a feature of waking life, and Homer's dreaming mind does not have the framework for them. It only has the sensation of the moment, the beer going down, the couch receiving him, the sound of the family somewhere in the house. The episodes that explore Homer's interior most honestly tend to be the quiet ones, the ones that happen between the larger plot events. An evening walk that turns into something more, a conversation with Marge that becomes unexpectedly real, a moment with one of the children where the fog lifts briefly and something genuine passes between them. These moments are small and they do not announce themselves and they resolve without fanfare, which is why they are the most true. Real emotional moments rarely announce themselves. They arrive sideways and then they are gone, and you are left with the memory of them and the work of understanding what they meant. Homer's memory is another complicated territory. His long-term memory is, in certain ways, extraordinary. He remembers his childhood with a specificity that the crayon and the radiation and the decades of low-level cognitive damage should theoretically have eroded. He remembers the feel of the house he grew up in. He remembers sounds and textures from before he has clear narrative memories. He remembers his mother's presence even before he knew she was gone. The ghost of something that was there and then was not, a warmth that came and went before he had the language to notice its going. His short-term memory is another matter. He forgets things. He forgets conversations he had this morning. He forgets where he put objects. He loops back on thoughts he already completed as if they are new. This is the pattern of certain kinds of neurological damage, where the mechanisms for consolidating short-term experience into long-term memory are disrupted, so that things that happened recently are more vulnerable to loss than things that happened decades ago, which have already been encoded into the deeper structures of memory and are more resistant to the damage. The radiation theory would predict precisely this pattern. Chronic low-level radiation exposure can affect the hippocampus, the brain structure most directly involved in the formation of new memories, without necessarily destroying the long-term memories that have already been established in other brain regions. Homer's past is more accessible to him than his present, which is why he is always slightly behind the current situation, always responding to something a beat late, always catching up to a world that has already moved on from where he understood it to be. The love he has for Marge exists in the long-term memory. It was established before the damage accumulated to its current level. It is encoded deeply, associated with sensory memories and emotional experiences that have been reinforced across decades until they are as durable as anything in Homer's mind. He will forget what they argued about last Tuesday, but he will not forget the particular way she looks when she is trying not to laugh at something he has said that was not meant to be funny, the exact angle of the effort, and the way it fails in the corners of her eyes. That is permanent. That is below the level of the damage. This is the most generous reading of Homer Simpson, a man whose mind was compromised before he could protect it, whose past is more available to him than his present, who loves with the parts of himself that are most resistant to loss, who persists with the specific stubbornness of someone who does not have the cognitive overhead to understand that persistence is optional. He is on the couch, he is holding his beer. The evening has that quality it sometimes has in Springfield, where the light goes sideways through the windows and the air is still, and something in the ordinary texture of the house feels almost sacred. Though Homer would not use that word, would not have access to that word, he would say instead, if pressed, that it was a pretty good night, that he had nothing to complain about, that things were pretty okay. Things are pretty okay. They always are, in the loop. They always will be. The marriage of Homer and Marge Simpson is, among other things, the longest continuously documented marriage in the history of American animated television. They have been married across every episode of a show that has been running since 1989. They have been married through more disasters and recoveries and resets than any fictional couple in recent memory. And the marriage has held. Not always gracefully, not always without visible strain, but it has held. And the holding is itself a subject worth examining with some care. The marriage is built on a quality that the show does not always have the vocabulary to name directly, which is a kind of witnessed intimacy that accumulates over time into something that is harder to abandon than it is to maintain. Homer and Marge know each other in the exhaustive way that only people who have lived inside the same small space for a very long time know each other. They know each other's rhythms, each other's failure modes, each other's particular faces for various emotional states. They know each other's sounds, the specific way the other person breathes when they are asleep, the particular cadence of a bad day, the way the kitchen feels different depending on which one of them is in it. This kind of knowledge is not the same as love, but it coexists with love in a way that reinforces it. You can leave someone you love. It is harder to leave someone who has become part of your perceptual landscape, someone whose absence would create a specific absence-shaped space in every room of your daily experience. Marge's arguments for leaving, when they surface, are real and substantiated. Homer has been irresponsible. Homer has been negligent. Homer has prioritized his own needs with a reflexivity that does not always pause to consider the displacement effect on the people around him. Homer has done things that, in a different kind of marriage, would have been unrecoverable. The show acknowledges this. It does not pretend that Marge's frustrations are irrational, or that her desire for something different is simply a failure of commitment. What the show suggests, in its more thoughtful episodes, is that Marge has made a calculation, not a cold calculation, not an economic one, but the kind of moral arithmetic that people perform when they are trying to understand whether the sum of a relationship is worth more than its parts. She has looked at Homer completely, the disaster and the love and the ridiculous and the tender, and she has decided that the complete picture is the one she wants. Not because she lacks the courage to want something else, because this is what she wants. The decision is hers. This is the thing the show handles with more care than it sometimes gets credit for. Marge is not a woman who stays because she does not know how to leave. She is a woman who stays because, at the level of her most fundamental choices, she has chosen this. And the choosing is ongoing. She chooses again every morning when she gets up and starts the day, and he is still there, and the house is still the house. Every morning is a recommitment. Every ordinary Tuesday is the marriage. Her relationship to her own disappointments is the most psychologically precise thing about her. She does not pretend the disappointments are not there. She does not perform contentment she does not feel. But she also does not allow the disappointments to become the primary story, because she has decided, with the same deliberateness she brings to everything, that the primary story is the one she is choosing to tell, and the primary story is not a story of disappointment. The blue hair reaches upward. The hands are always occupied. The straight spine holds. And in the kitchen on Evergreen Terrace, something is always on the stove, because that is what Marge does. She feeds people. She takes what is available and she makes something from it. And the people who eat what she makes are nourished, even when they do not notice the nourishing, even when they eat without looking up, even when they take the food and the warmth and the care that went into it as simply what dinner is, simply what happens, simply the texture of their ordinary life. Which is what it is. That is the point. That is the work of 36 years in the same house with the same man and the same children who do not age and the same cracked sidewalk outside and the same strange town around it, always running, always resetting, always beginning again. The marriage holds. And the holding is its own kind of answer. There is something that needs to be said about the way Bart Simpson moves through space. He does not walk if he can run. He does not run if he can skate. He does not proceed in any direction in any straight line when a diagonal or a trajectory through something is available. He moves through Springfield with the particular locomotion of a person who has internalized the principle that stillness is a form of surrender and keeps his body in motion as a matter of strategy. This is not simply youthful energy, though it looks like that from the outside. The specific quality of Bart's motion, its perpetual low-grade urgency, the way he is always slightly leaning forward as if arrival is always more important than transit, suggests something else. Something closer to the behavior of a person who has learned that the state of being in motion is, for them, significantly safer than the state of being still. When Bart is still, he is in the principal's office, or in the classroom, or in a context where stillness is imposed on him by an institutional framework that he did not choose and that does not fit him. Stillness for Bart is associated with judgment, with the evaluation of his shortcomings by people who have the power to formally assess him as insufficient, with the experience of sitting while someone else decides what is wrong with him and what should be done about it. Motion removes him from that context. On the skateboard, on the run, in the middle of whatever is currently happening, Bart is the agent of the situation rather than the subject of an institutional response to him. He prefers being the one who generates events over being the one who is managed because of them. This is not a complicated preference. Most people share it. But most people are not Bart Simpson in Springfield Elementary, where the institutional response to him has been so consistent and so comprehensive that it has become background, something as predictable as weather, something he navigates around rather than through. The skateboard is his most essential possession, and the show has known this from the beginning. The skateboard is mobility. It is speed and direction at his own discretion. It is the vehicle of his primary expression, which is not verbal but physical, the communication of intent through trajectory and velocity. Bart on his skateboard is Bart in his native register, the version of himself that is closest to what he actually is when the institutional overlay is removed. What he is, at the most basic level, is a child who needed more than he got and found ways to survive the deficit that were, under the circumstances, genuinely creative. The pranks are creativity. The schemes are creativity. The social navigation of a school environment that is actively hostile to his kind of intelligence is creativity of a sophisticated order. He has not been given the conditions to direct that creativity toward anything productive, but the creativity itself is real and it is his. There is an episode in the show's better seasons where Bart's capacity for connection and leadership is allowed to be the point rather than the setup for a lesson about his limitations. He organizes people, he moves groups. He understands intuitively how to get people to go somewhere together, which is a skill that requires a sophisticated and largely unconscious theory of what makes people move. This skill is treated as a liability in the context of Springfield Elementary because it tends to be directed toward the school as an institution of resistance rather than toward the goals the school is trying to achieve. But the skill itself is not a liability. It is a gift being expressed sideways because the sideways channels are the ones available to him. Under the radiation theory, Bart's particular presentation may be the result of a hyperactive nervous system response to chronic low-level environmental contamination. The research on environmental toxins and attention and behavior in children suggests that certain kinds of exposure, particularly to heavy metals and radiation, can produce precisely the behavioral profile that Bart exhibits: the inability to modulate arousal levels, the difficulty with sustained attention in conditions that require it, the impulsivity, the high energy, the quick emotional reactivity. These are not character flaws. They are neurological signatures of an environment that was not built to support healthy childhood development. And Bart, growing up in that environment, without the diagnosis that might have given him tools, without the accommodation that might have given him access, without the understanding that might have given him permission to be who he actually was, rather than the failure of what the school system needed him to be, learned to cope with what was available, which was the skateboard and the prank and the movement and the speed and the perpetual forward lean into whatever was coming next. He is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. And the skateboard is still under his feet and the trajectory is still forward and the city is still out there in every direction, all of Springfield spread around him. And he is always just leaving and always just arriving and always, perpetually, in transit. Late afternoon in Springfield. The kind of light that comes in low through the windows and makes the dust visible in the air. Small particles suspended, not falling, just present. The way certain kinds of beauty are present, without drama, without announcement. Lisa has been home from school for 40 minutes. She did her homework in 30, which left 10 minutes to sit in her room with the saxophone in her lap and the music stand in front of her and the particular interior quiet that comes when the instrument is about to be played. The jazz she plays is not the jazz on the radio, if Springfield's radio plays jazz, which it might or might not depending on the episode. The jazz she plays is hers, specifically and unreproducibly, assembled from the recordings she has absorbed and the theory she has taught herself, and the something she cannot name that happens when she stops thinking about what she is playing and starts listening to what she is about to play. This is the moment musicians describe and cannot fully explain, when the rational faculty steps aside and the music begins to make its own decisions, and the player's job is to follow where it goes and trust that the following will produce something worth following. Lisa trusts this process completely. It is one of the few domains in her life where trust is not a complicated operation. In most other areas, trust requires evidence, requires the assessment of reliability and track record, and the weighing of accumulated data points. But in the music, the trust is simply there, prior to evidence, more fundamental than evidence, the way certain kinds of knowing are prior to their justification. She plays. The sound moves through the room and down the hallway and through the gap under her door. Somewhere in the house, it is heard. Marge pauses in whatever she is doing and listens for a moment. Homer, if he is home, probably does not consciously register it, but something in his nervous system receives it, the specific frequency of his daughter's saxophone, and files it in the category of things that mean the house is functioning, that everyone is where they are supposed to be, that the evening is the evening. The saxophone was given to her. This is another one of those quiet facts that the show established and then mostly left alone, but which carries weight when you follow it. Someone gave Lisa her instrument. Someone saw something in her that merited the gift of a way to express it. This is not a trivial thing. The access to a musical instrument, to lessons if she had them, to the culture of music making that makes a child understand that making music is something a person can do, not just consume but make, is not universal. Not all children are given it. Lisa was given it, and the giving changed the shape of her life. The saxophone is the thing she will always have, regardless of what Springfield does or does not provide her. It is the domain that is entirely hers, organized by no one else's requirements, evaluated by no one else's standards, useful to no one else's institutional agenda. It is just music. It is just the sound of her making something in the privacy of her own intelligence and her own feeling, without anyone grading her on it. Under the coma theory, if Homer is dreaming, then Lisa's saxophone is what he has given her in the dream. The access to the thing that makes her fully herself. He could not always give her this in waking life, because waking life was constrained and complicated and he was not always present in the ways she needed. But in the dream, he can give her the saxophone and the room and the afternoon light and the 40 minutes after homework and the permission to simply play. That is a very specific thing to give a child. The permission to simply be in the practice of the thing that makes them most themselves. It is perhaps the most valuable gift a parent can give and the one that is most often withheld by circumstance, or by the pressure of other needs, or by the simple difficulty of recognizing what a child's particular kind of selfhood requires. Homer, in the dream, recognizes it, he gives it to her, and she plays. The music continues through the house until dinner. Then she stops. She puts the saxophone in its case with the care she gives everything that matters to her, which is different from the care you give breakable objects. It is the care that comes from understanding what something is worth, from knowing that not everything important can be replaced if it is lost. She closes the case. She goes downstairs. The evening begins. The power plant has a smell. Every industrial facility does, the particular chemical signature of whatever process it contains, and the Springfield nuclear power plant is no exception. The workers who have been there long enough have stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the smell of your own house after enough days inside it. But visitors notice. Government inspectors, in the rare instances when inspectors have arrived with the intention of doing what inspectors are supposed to do, have noted the smell. Former employees who left and returned for any reason have noted it. It is described variably as metallic, or acrid, or carrying some quality below the level of the named chemical categories, something older and harder to classify. Burns does not notice the smell. He has been in and out of this building for decades. He was present when the facility was constructed, which places him in a relationship to it that goes beyond employer or owner or operator. He was there when the first reactor came online. He was there when the safety shortcuts were made, when the cost estimates for compliant operation were reviewed and rejected, when the decisions were taken that have made this building one of the most dangerous workplaces in the history of American industry. He made those decisions. He was present for them. They were his. The architecture of the plant is, like everything Burns has built, simultaneously functional and deliberately inhospitable to the people who work inside it. The corridors are long and poorly lit. The signage is inconsistent and in places misleading. The workspaces are designed for the operation of the machinery rather than the comfort or safety of the operators. This is not negligence. This is the result of a design philosophy in which the people inside the building are assets of approximately the same category as the equipment, to be maintained at the minimum level necessary for continued operation and otherwise not given particular consideration. Homer's workspace, Sector 7G, is one of the innermost sections of the facility. This is not a coincidence. The placement of the most critical safety functions in the deepest part of the building, furthest from the exits, furthest from the natural light, deepest into the contamination gradient that radiates outward from the reactor core, is a choice that reflects something about the value Burns places on the people who perform those functions. The person responsible for preventing the plant's most catastrophic failure scenarios occupies a space where the daily baseline of environmental exposure is highest and the working conditions most hostile to the sustained attention and clear thinking that the job theoretically requires. Homer has been doing this job for his entire adult life. The show tracks this with its characteristic mixture of comedy and quiet horror. He sleeps at his console. He eats at his console. He has caused incidents ranging from minor to nearly catastrophic through a combination of inattention, impaired judgment, and the fundamental mismatch between the cognitive demands of his position and the cognitive resources available to him. He has survived all of these incidents. So has the plant. So has Springfield. Though Springfield's ongoing contamination suggests that survival and safety are not the same thing. Burns, who understands radiation better than anyone else in Springfield, understands precisely what the cumulative exposure of decades in Sector 7G does to the biology of the person exposed to it. He has this understanding from two sources. The first is the scientific literature, which he has access to through the research divisions of his various enterprises. The second is his own body, which he has been managing through radiation-related medical intervention for long enough to have developed a practitioner's understanding of what chronic exposure does and does not do to biological systems. He knows what the plant is doing to Homer. He has always known. He has continued employing Homer anyway, through the terms of the deal with Grandpa Abe, through the bureaucratic convenience of an employee who will never report violations because the employee is unable to fully process what the violations mean, through the simple economics of a workforce that has been sufficiently contaminated to be significantly less capable of the kind of organized resistance that might threaten the plant's operation. The deal with Abe is worth examining one more time, because it is the key that opens the whole room of the Burns-Simpson relationship. Burns committed a crime that Abe knew about. Abe could have reported it. Abe could have used the knowledge to force remediation of some kind, to demand that Burns change some aspect of his conduct that was causing harm. Instead, Abe negotiated personal benefit, guaranteed employment for his son. He turned the knowledge of a crime into a private arrangement that protected one member of his family while leaving the broader community unprotected. This is the bargain that Springfield makes constantly, in various forms, with various parties. The knowledge of harm traded for individual insulation from the consequences of the harm. The community's protection sacrificed for the protection of the individual who happened to have the knowledge. Springfield is full of these arrangements, made in private between people who knew something and people who had something to offer, and the cumulative effect is a town that has traded its capacity for collective action for a collection of individual accommodations that benefit no one at scale. Burns understood this perfectly. He has made versions of this arrangement with enough people over enough decades that the town's capacity for organized resistance to his interests has been comprehensively compromised. Not through any single transaction, but through the patient accumulation of transactions, each one small, each one making sense to the individual who entered it, each one adding to the structure of a town that cannot challenge the institution that is killing it. He sits in his office. He looks out over the town. The cooling towers are there, in his eye line, the most visible feature of his domain. He does not look at them with guilt. He does not look at them with regret. He looks at them with the specific satisfaction of a man who built something that has outlasted everything that was supposed to stop it, that continues running despite every regulatory attempt and every investigative inquiry and every three-eyed fish and every moment of public outrage that has not amounted to lasting consequence. He is old. He has been old for a very long time, and the plant is still running. Springfield Elementary School is a building that has been standing for long enough to have absorbed the particular institutional atmosphere of a public school that has never quite had sufficient resources and has therefore always been running slightly behind what it needed to be. The linoleum in the hallways is scuffed. The textbooks, in the episodes where anyone examines them closely, contain information that is outdated to varying degrees. The library is present but under-resourced. The equipment in the gymnasium is functional in the most basic sense, which is to say that it exists and mostly works but would not inspire confidence in any parent comparing it to what is available in schools in other towns. This is where the children of Springfield spend their days. Not just Bart and Lisa, whose experiences we have followed in some detail, but all of them, the entire cohort of Springfield children who will become the next generation of Springfield adults and who are being shaped, in their daily experience, by an institution that is itself shaped by the same forces that shape everything else in this town. The teachers are a study. Mrs. Crabapple, Bart's teacher, is one of the show's more fully developed secondary characters, and the portrait of her is not flattering in its honesty. She is tired. She has been a teacher for long enough that the original impulse toward the profession, whatever it was, has been worn down by the daily reality of a classroom that is under-resourced and a student body that includes Bart Simpson. She is not without capability. She has moments of genuine connection with her students. She has moments where she remembers what she is doing and why it matters. But these moments exist in a context of sustained depletion that the show captures in the specific quality of her exhaustion, the particular competence of someone who is doing their job on reserves rather than on the energy that the job requires. The children around Bart and Lisa are similarly worth attention. Milhouse Van Houten, who was already discussed briefly in Bart's section, is the character who is most explicitly defined by his relationship to someone else. He is Bart's best friend in a way that has organized his entire social identity. He does not appear to have a self outside the context of that friendship in any sustained way. This is its own kind of damage, the particular vulnerability of the child who has found one relationship that feels safe and has built everything around it rather than risking the exposure of trying to build others. Nelson Muntz is the bully, which is the role he fills in the narrative, but the show has made a sustained effort, across many episodes, to provide Nelson with enough context that the bully role becomes visibly insufficient as a complete description. Nelson is a child without adequate parents, which is a condition that the show depicts with an honesty that goes beyond the comedic. His home is a site of genuine dysfunction and genuine deprivation. He is a child who has had to develop toughness as a survival strategy, who learned very early that the world did not have particular concern for his well-being, and that the most reliable response to this knowledge was to be harder than the world expected. This is how children who are failed by the systems around them sometimes respond. They become the thing the failure made them, and then the failure is attributed to their character rather than to the conditions that produced it. Nelson is difficult because Nelson has been in difficult conditions, and Springfield Elementary responds to the difficulty of Nelson's behavior rather than to the conditions that produce it, because responding to the conditions would require resources and structural change and a form of institutional self-reflection that is not available in a school running on the budget the plant's tax contributions make possible. The children of Springfield Elementary are the next generation of the experiment. The same contaminated water, the same irradiated air, the same institutional poverty that keeps the school under-resourced, the same collective denial that keeps the town from acknowledging what is being done to its children. They are growing up inside the same conditions that shaped their parents, with the same limited tools, with the same environmental damage accumulating in their systems, and they will eventually produce their own children who will go to the same school and breathe the same air and drink the same water and cycle into the same positions. This is Springfield's deepest continuity. Not the characters, who do not age, but the conditions, which persist. The conditions are the most stable thing in Springfield. More stable than the timeline, more stable than the geography, more stable than the stories the show tells about who these people are. The conditions are the water and the air and the money and the power and the deal that was made and the lie that was told and the truth that was exiled on a train and the vote that was taken to keep things as they are. The children file into the school in the morning. The bell rings, the doors close, the day begins. Every morning in Springfield is the morning of the same year. This is the thing that is hardest to hold in the mind simultaneously with everything else, because you want to locate the show in time, you want to place it in the context of when it is happening, and the show keeps sliding out from under that impulse. It is set in whatever year it is currently airing. It has always been set in whatever year it is currently airing. When the show aired in 1990, it was a show set in 1990. When it aired in 2010, it was a show set in 2010. When it airs now, it is a show set now. And through all of this, the characters have not aged. The technology around them has changed. The cultural references shift. The specific texture of what it means to be an ordinary American family has evolved in ways the show incorporates the smartphones and the streaming and the changing political landscape and the new things the culture is worried about. But Homer is still the same Homer. Marge is still the same Marge. Bart has not graduated. Lisa has not entered adolescence. Maggie has not spoken a second word. The floating timeline is the show's most elegant and most destabilizing device, because it solves a real production problem. How do you continue a show indefinitely without writing the characters out of the premise that generates them, and simultaneously creates a metaphysical impossibility that becomes more visible the longer the show runs? At 10 years, the floating timeline is a convention. At 20 years, it is a puzzle. At 36 years, it is a philosophical crisis hiding in plain sight. The theories we have been exploring across this entire journey are, in one reading, all attempts to provide the floating timeline with a diegetic explanation, to find within the show's own logic a reason for the thing that should not be possible. The radiation theory explains it as biological mutation. The coma theory explains it as the dream logic of an unconscious mind. The collective denial theory explains it as a social choice. The Burns immortality theory explains it as evidence that the rules of biology can be broken for those with sufficient resources. And the prediction theory, the most optimistic of the frameworks, suggests that the floating timeline is actually a reflection of something true about the relationship between the show and American culture, that the Simpsons do not age because the America they represent does not age, that the condition they embody is permanent rather than historical. Each of these explanations catches something real, and none of them fully accounts for the specific emotional charge that the floating timeline creates in long-term viewers. Because the charge is not primarily intellectual, it is something that registers in the body, in the particular ache that comes from watching people you have watched grow older, while the people themselves do not. The viewer's age. This is the irony that the floating timeline ultimately produces. The show keeps its characters fixed while its audience moves forward. The person who watched the first episode as a child is now middle-aged. Their children have seen episodes that their parents saw first runs of. And Bart is still 10. And Lisa is still 8. And the couch is still the couch. And the house is still the house. And the spring is still going to happen. And summer and fall and then winter and then the whole thing again. There is something genuinely moving about this, under the right conditions. The show as a kind of temporal anchor. The characters as a fixed point against which the viewer can measure the passage of their own time. When you watch an episode that you first watched as a child, and the episode is exactly the same and you are not the same at all, what you are experiencing is the specific sadness and the specific comfort of a world that does not change in a life that does. Springfield endures, The Simpsons endure, and the viewer carries both forward into whatever comes next, wherever that is, wherever they are watching this from. Whatever hour of the night or the morning it has become while this has been playing. The timeline floats, the loop holds, the family is always where you left them. Springfield exists in a country. This is something the show acknowledges occasionally and almost never explores. There is a United States outside of Springfield. There are other towns, other cities, other communities, living under different conditions, operating under different arrangements between their populations and their institutions. When the show takes characters outside Springfield, which it does with some regularity, the world they encounter is legible as a real world with real rules and real consequences, different from the world inside the town in ways that the characters usually do not register, but the viewer does. The Springfield Dome from the Simpsons movie is the most explicit statement the show has ever made about the town's relationship to the world outside it. The EPA determined that Springfield's contamination was severe enough that it had to be physically contained, separated from the surrounding environment by a barrier that would prevent the town's pollution from spreading further. This is an act of quarantine. The United States government looked at Springfield and decided that the safest thing for the country was to put a wall around it. The people inside the dome when it went up are still inside the dome. Not in any literal sense that the show has maintained past the film, because the film resolved the dome situation and the show proceeded without that context. But the metaphor persists. Springfield is a contained environment. What happens inside it stays inside it. The contamination, the corruption, the adaptive behaviors of a population that has been shaped by decades of unaddressed harm, these are Springfield's internal characteristics, distinct from the world outside in ways that the show's visual language has always encoded, the different look of people who live in the town and people who come from elsewhere. The guest characters are the clearest evidence of this distinction. When real-world celebrities appear as versions of themselves in Springfield, or when outside characters arrive with designs that differ from the show's standard Springfield template, the visual difference is legible. Their proportions are different. Their eyes are different. Their relationship to the physical world operates by slightly different rules, and the show has always presented this as a difference in art style, which is the correct literal explanation and also the convenient one, because the convenient explanation is the one that allows the contamination reading to remain implicit rather than stated. The world outside Springfield is where Mona Simpson went when she had to go. It is where the real Seymour Skinner was exiled to. It is where the standards of the actual United States federal government live. The standards that, when applied to Springfield, produce the conclusion that the town is a hazard. The world outside Springfield is where accountability lives, where the questions that Springfield will not ask get asked by people who do not have the same investment in not asking them, where the three-eyed fish would produce a regulatory response rather than a gubernatorial photo opportunity. The characters of Springfield do not go to that world and stay. They return. They are pulled back by the same gravity that keeps the timeline floating. The gravity of the story, the gravity of the loop, the gravity of belonging to a place even when the place is the thing that is hurting you. This is the most human thing about Springfield, ultimately. That people stay, that the place claims them. That the accumulated history of living somewhere, of having built your life inside a particular set of coordinates, produces a relationship to that place that is not rational, not cost-benefit, not the result of any decision made with full information and full freedom. It is the relationship of belonging, of being of a place, which is different from choosing to be in it. Homer belongs to Springfield. Marge belongs to Springfield. Their children were born into Springfield and have never lived anywhere else. The contamination is in them. The reset is in them. The collective agreement to not know is in them, as deeply encoded as anything else. They could not leave even if they decided to leave, because leaving Springfield would require becoming people who did not grow up in Springfield, and they do not know how to do that. The world outside the dome is real, and it operates by different rules. And sometimes, late on a quiet Springfield evening, you can almost see it from the top of the water tower. The lights of other places, far away, where the fish have the correct number of eyes and the principals are who they say they are, and the billionaires are merely rich rather than impossible. But Springfield is home, and home is where you come back to, regardless of what waits there. The plant is still running, the light is still orange, the water still carries what it carries, and everyone on Evergreen Terrace sleeps, mostly, in the ways that they can. There is a particular quality to the sound of Springfield that is not often discussed, because sound is not what the show is primarily about. It is a visual medium. What you see is what you analyze. But sound is ambient. Sound is constant. Sound is the thing that tells you where you are even with your eyes closed. And Springfield, for anyone paying attention, has a specific acoustic signature that carries within it everything that is wrong and everything that persists. There is the hum of the plant. It is not dramatic, not a sci-fi drone, not the kind of industrial sound that announces itself as significant. It is lower than that, below the range where most people consciously register it, a vibration more than a sound, something felt in the chest and the back of the throat rather than heard in the conventional sense. The workers at the plant have stopped noticing it, as they have stopped noticing many things about the plant. The residents who live nearest to the facility have stopped noticing it. It is simply part of what the air feels like here, part of the baseline, below the level of conscious awareness. Below conscious awareness is not the same as without effect. Research on low-frequency environmental noise, on the physiological impact of chronic exposure to sounds and vibrations below the threshold of conscious registration, suggests that these frequencies affect the nervous system in ways that the person experiencing them is not aware of. Sleep disruption, chronic low-grade stress responses, cognitive effects. The body responds to things the mind does not register as having registered. The plant hums. It has hummed for as long as anyone in Springfield can remember, and the residents of the town, who have lived their entire lives in the acoustic field of that hum, who breathe air that carries it and sleep in houses that transmit it through their foundations, are bodies shaped by a sound they have never consciously heard. There is also the sound of Moe's Tavern, which is its own acoustic environment. The specific mix of voices at a certain hour, the particular quality of conversation that happens in bars in the middle of the afternoon when the people who have nowhere else to be are the people who are there. These are not quiet conversations, but they are also not loud in the way of bars on a Saturday night, the deliberate social loudness of people performing enjoyment. They are the sounds of people talking because they are in the habit of talking when there are other people around, because silence in that context would require explanation, would require acknowledging that they are there primarily because they have nowhere else they need to be. Homer's voice is part of the soundscape of Evergreen Terrace. His particular laugh, the quality of his exclamations of various kinds, the specific vocal register of someone who has never learned to modulate his sound relative to the people around him, who simply produces whatever sound the moment is producing in him at full volume. This is not inconsiderate, precisely. Homer does not modulate because modulation requires a kind of ongoing social awareness that is, for him, not consistently available. He is simply loud, in the way of someone whose internal and external lives do not have a significant gap between them. Lisa's saxophone, already discussed in its own expansion, is the most beautiful sound on Evergreen Terrace. This is not a subjective assessment, at least not only. The saxophone, played with the genuine talent and feeling that Lisa brings to it, is an objectively different quality of sound from the ambient noise of the house and the street and the plant. It is sound that was made on purpose, that was shaped by intention and skill, that carries within it something that was not there before it was played. This is the fundamental nature of music, that it adds to the world something that was not there before it was made. And in Springfield, which has been taking things away from its residents for a very long time, the adding of something is significant. Bart's sound is the sound of impact. Skateboard on pavement, the slap of wheels against a ramp, the particular auditory result of various experiments in how a 10-year-old body can interact with the physical world before gravity asserts itself. He is noisy in motion and noisy in rest, the kind of person whose presence in a room is auditorily obvious from the moment of arrival. This is not a performance of presence. It is simply the way he occupies space, at full volume, without apology, because the concept of reducing his presence to accommodate other people's preferences is one that has not found purchase in his operating framework. Marge hums when she is cooking or cleaning, a sound so faint and so steady that it is usually below the threshold of conscious notice. She is not performing happiness when she hums. She is not performing contentment. She is doing the thing that people sometimes do when their hands are occupied and their minds are elsewhere, producing a sound that is less about communication than about being in one's own presence, about the particular quiet company of oneself. The hum of Marge cooking and the hum of the plant beyond the walls of the house are both continuous, both below the level of conscious awareness, both part of what it sounds like to be in this particular place on this particular street. They are different in every way except that they are always there. The plant hum is damage. Marge's hum is care. But they are both constants. They are both the background against which the more notable sounds take place. Maggie makes very little sound. The pacifier produces its soft, repetitive movement, which has a sound, a tiny, wet rhythm that is almost impossible to hear unless the room is very quiet. She produces the sounds of infants, occasional and unpredictable, responding to stimuli. But the deliberate sounds, the sounds that would be communication, the sounds that would mean something, she withholds. The silence around Maggie is its own sound, if you have been listening long enough to notice what it is shaped by. Homer's snoring, heard from the hallway outside the bedroom door late at night, is one of the most reliable acoustic features of Evergreen Terrace. It has a consistency and a volume that the show has sometimes used for comedy, but which, in the context of thinking about what the house sounds like from the inside, is simply there. The sound of someone deeply asleep. The sound of someone who has gone somewhere that the problems of the waking day cannot follow, at least not to the level of consciousness. Unless the coma theory is true, in which case the snoring is the sound of a man who went somewhere deeper than sleep a long time ago and has been sending back dispatches ever since. And the dispatches are the episodes, and the episodes are the dream, and the dream is everything. The plant hums, the saxophone plays. The television speaks to a room that may or may not be listening. Somewhere down the street, a skateboard is moving, the sound of it Doppler shifting as it passes, already almost gone. This is what Springfield sounds like. This is the acoustic texture of the loop, the constant undertone of the thing that is wrong with the place, and beneath it and through it, the particular ordinary sounds of people living their lives inside the thing that is wrong, without always being able to hear the difference. The very first full-length episode of The Simpsons was a Christmas special, Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, it was called. And it aired on the 17th of December, 1989. And it established, in the space of a single half-hour, more of what the show was and what it would be than most programs manage in a full season. Because the Christmas episode is the purest form of the show's premise. It is a family trying to have a good holiday. This is the entirety of the plot. The obstacles are the show. The characters are the story. In that first episode, Homer discovers that there will be no Christmas bonus from the plant. Burns, in one of his most efficient acts of institutional cruelty, withholds the bonus, and Homer, who has been counting on it because Bart's tattoo removal consumed the family's savings, finds himself facing a Christmas with no gifts and no way to provide them. He takes a second job as a department store Santa Claus. The job pays badly. The training is inadequate. The experience is degrading in the specific way that holiday retail is degrading, not dramatically humiliating, just steadily grinding down any remaining sense of professional dignity until you are wearing a costume and asking small children what they want from a fictional, magical figure, while children stare at you with the particular skepticism of children who are not sure they believe in the fictional, magical figure and are not sure they believe in you either. He takes his final paycheck and, in a moment of something that might be optimism or might just be the desperation of someone who has run out of other options, goes to the dog track. He bets on a dog named Santa's Little Helper. The dog is 50-1. The dog loses. Homer is standing in the parking lot of the dog track on Christmas Eve with no money and no gifts and a family at home waiting for him. And Santa's Little Helper, who also lost and whose owner is disposing of him for losing, comes up to Homer in the parking lot, and Homer brings him home, and the dog is the gift. And the family is delighted. This is the ending. Not a triumph of wealth or status or material success. A man and a dog in a parking lot, choosing each other on Christmas Eve, and the family receiving this with the kind of joy that the show has always understood, lives in things that are not on any wish list. The Christmas episode established the show's emotional register in its first half hour, that the family is not okay in the sense of being comfortable or secure or without problems, that the problems are real and the resources for addressing them are insufficient, that the resolution is not going to be clean or complete, and that the love is genuine and the love is enough, not to solve the problems, but to make the problems worth surviving. Subsequent Christmas episodes have returned to this register with varying degrees of success. The tradition of the Christmas special in the American television landscape tends toward a particular kind of resolution, the warmth restored, the conflict resolved, the family reunited by the snow and the holiday, and the presence of things more important than whatever was dividing them. The Simpsons has sometimes produced this and sometimes complicated it. Its best holiday episodes are the ones where the complication is the point, where the resolution is imperfect, where the warmth is present but so is the difficulty, and the show allows both to be true simultaneously. The holiday episode is the genre that requires the show to be most directly about what it is always indirectly about, which is what it means to be a family with insufficient resources trying to have a good life, what it costs, what it looks like when it works, and what the working looks like even when it is not complete. The Christmas episode brings the show's central question to the surface and makes it explicit and asks the audience to hold it directly without the mediation of comedy, or with comedy that has been thinned enough that the feeling underneath is visible. The feeling underneath is, We are trying. This family is trying. They do not always know how to try correctly. They fail each other with some regularity and in various directions, but they are trying. And the trying is real. And the trying is, in the world of Springfield, sufficient not to produce a perfect outcome, to produce a continuing one. The first episode ends with Bart scratching Santa's little helper behind the ears and the dog settling into the family in the way that dogs settle into families, completely and immediately, as if the arrangement was always intended and the parking lot was simply the place where the arrangement found its form. Homer watches this. He is not happy exactly, in the way of someone who has gotten what they wanted. He is relieved. And the relief has a quality to it that is its own kind of happiness. The specific happiness of someone who was genuinely afraid of what would happen and discovered that what happened was okay. It is Christmas in Springfield. The snow is falling or not falling depending on the episode and the continuity. The plant is humming. The house is warm. The family is together. Maggie is watching something from her spot on the floor with her enormous eyes, taking in everything, saying nothing. Homer falls asleep on the couch. The television plays. Something is okay tonight. This something tonight is enough. Every October, Springfield holds its own contained apocalypse. The Treehouse of Horror anthology specials have been running since the show's second season, and they are the moment every year when The Simpsons is permitted to say out loud what it has been saying implicitly all year, when the safety of the horror genre allows the show to make explicit what the regular episodes approach obliquely. The anthology format is important here. 3 separate stories per special, each operating by its own rules, each licensed by the horror framework to take things further than the regular episodes can go. Characters die. Monsters exist. Technology fails in catastrophic ways. Society collapses. The laws of physics bend or break. And the Simpsons family, or various members of it, navigate these situations with varying degrees of success and varying degrees of horror. The real subject of the Treehouse of Horror specials, considered as a body of work over 35 years, is the same as the real subject of the regular series. It is the family under pressure. It is what happens to these specific people when the pressure is maximal, when there is no comfortable resolution available, when the reset cannot come and the catastrophe cannot be managed. The horror framework allows the show to explore failure states that the regular episodes cannot sustain. Homer dies in the Treehouse of Horror specials with some regularity. He is killed by monsters, by supernatural forces, by accidents, by the direct consequences of his own poor decisions. And the deaths, because this is the horror anthology and the rules are different here, are allowed to be actual deaths rather than the near misses and recoveries of the regular series. Homer's capacity to survive anything, which is one of the regular series' most consistent conceits, is sometimes suspended in the Treehouse episodes, and the suspension reveals something. When Homer dies in a Treehouse episode, the moment is often genuinely affecting in a way that the show's tone rarely permits. Because even in a horror anthology, even in a context where the rules of the regular series do not apply, Homer is still Homer. He is still the person we have been watching. His death is not emotionally neutral, even when it is played for dark comedy. There is a response in the viewer, a recognition that something significant has happened even in a context where it is not supposed to be significant. This is the specific power that the Treehouse specials have developed over 30 years of the same family being put through extraordinary scenarios. The audience knows these people. The knowing is deep and long, and when the horror anthology puts them in genuine danger, the danger is not abstract or impersonal. It is happening to Homer, to Marge, to Bart, to Lisa, to Maggie. The names carry weight. The weight is what makes the horror work. The specials have also, across their run, developed their own canon of fears that are specifically Springfield's. The fear of technology turning against its users, which is a general cultural anxiety, but which has particular resonance in a town whose primary technological institution is a nuclear plant operating with 342 safety violations. The fear of the body failing or transforming in ways that are not chosen, which is a general human fear but which has particular resonance in a town where the bodies of the residents have already been changed by their environment in ways they cannot fully register. The fear of authority figures who cannot be trusted, which is again general but which is specifically grounded in a town whose authority figures include a police chief who is incompetent, a principal who is not who he says he is, and an employer who is actively causing harm. The Treehouse of Horror specials are Springfield's way of naming its fears at full volume. For 2 or 3 shorts every October, the town is allowed to acknowledge directly what the rest of the year is managed by not acknowledging. The things that are wrong are not just wrong, they are monstrous. They are terrifying. They are the stuff of horror in the oldest and most honest sense of the genre. And then the special ends, and the next regular episode begins. And Springfield returns to its baseline management of the things that are wrong. The collective agreement to treat them as manageable rather than monstrous. The monsters go back into the special category. The plant is just the plant again. Burns is just an eccentric old man. Homer is just the safety inspector. Everything returns to its designated place. Until next October, when Springfield admits, for a few half hours, that it is afraid. Imagine the moment between the space that is not quite the end of one episode and not quite the beginning of the next. The credits have rolled, the theme has played, the couch gag has happened, whatever version of it this week produced, and the family has settled into their positions on the couch in the dark, facing the light of the television. What is the television showing? This is a question the show has never answered directly. The television in the Simpson living room is always on, or nearly always. It is the background presence, the electronic hearth, the ambient light source of the household. Homer watches it. He watches it with a quality of attention that is not quite passive and not quite active, the kind of watching that happens when you are present enough to receive what is on the screen, but not so invested that you are fully tracking the narrative. The watching is partly about what is being shown and partly about the watching itself. The particular comfort of having something to look at that does not require you to respond. In the space between the episodes, in the loop that connects the end of one night to the beginning of another, Homer is in front of the television. It is showing something. The something changes. Shows and news and sports and commercials and the late-night programming that has a different quality from prime time, stranger and quieter, as if the night has changed the nature of what is available. Homer watches all of it with the same level of attention. The medium matters more to him than the message. In this context, what matters is the light and the sound and the sense of a world continuing to produce information at the correct rate. This is the coma theory's most intimate implication. If Homer is dreaming, if all of Springfield is a dream being produced by a brain in a hospital bed, then the television in the Simpson living room is the medium through which the hospital world leaks in. The ambient stimuli of the room where his body lies, the sounds of the medical equipment and the visitors and the television in the corner that someone put on, to make the room feel less clinical, these things are being received by a brain that is not conscious, but is not completely absent either. And the brain is incorporating them. It is making them into Springfield. It is translating the sounds of the real world into the imagery of the dream world. Every celebrity who walks into Moe's Tavern is a voice Homer heard through the fog of his unconscious. Every news story that Springfield reacts to is an echo of real news playing on the TV in the hospital room. Every new technology that appears in Springfield is an ambient, overheard description of something that exists in the world Homer is absent from. The dream does not originate in nothing. It originates in the world outside the dream, processed through the filter of an unconscious mind, translated into the terms of the story that mind knows how to tell. Homer's story is about his family. The dream is about his family. Everything that enters the dream comes out as something about his family. The news becomes something that affects The Simpsons. The celebrities become characters who interact with The Simpsons. The cultural shifts become contexts that The Simpsons navigate. The dream is a family story because Homer's mind, working without the direction of conscious intention, returns always to the same subject, the only one that matters to him. In the hospital room, the machines are doing their work. The visitors, if there are visitors, come and sit and come and sit. The television in the corner shows whatever it shows. And Homer's brain, in the depths of its condition, receives all of it and makes Springfield from it, makes the family from it, makes another episode from it, another night on the couch with the beer going down and the light of the television on his face and the sound of the house around him and the knowledge, below language, below thought, in the body itself, that they are there. They are always there. The television is still on. The loop holds. And outside the house on Evergreen Terrace, Springfield is doing what Springfield does. Continuing, persisting, running the plant and keeping the deals and forgetting what it cannot afford to remember, and keeping the family in the house where they belong. Until the next episode, and the one after that, and every one after that, for as long as we keep watching, for as long as we keep them there, for as long as we need the version of home they represent to still exist somewhere, available, unchanging, on the other side of the screen. The couch gag is the most watched recurring visual in the history of American television. Before every episode, in some form, the Simpson family runs into their living room and arrives at the couch in a configuration that has been different in every iteration. Some of them absurdist, some of them technically extraordinary, some of them quiet and simple, all of them ending in the same place. The family on the couch, together, in front of the television. This is the image the show chooses for its opening. Not the plant, though the plant is in the credits too. Not Springfield in its full complexity. Not Burns in his tower, or Ned in his garden, or Moe behind his bar. The image the show chooses to close its introduction every single time is the family on the couch. There is something clarifying about this choice. After everything we have followed through this long night, after the contamination and the coma and the shooting and the immortality and the lies and the collective denial and the conspiracy that runs 3 generations deep, after all of it, the show insists on this image. The family together, the couch receiving them, the television in front of them showing the same image we are looking at. The couch is the destination of every episode. Every catastrophe eventually resolves in the direction of the couch. Every adventure concludes with a return to it. Every reset brings everyone back to the same cushions, the same arrangement, the same light from the same television. The couch is the proof of concept. The couch is what the loop is protecting. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie on the couch together. This is what Homer is dreaming about, if he is dreaming. This specific image. Not the resolution of any plot, not the acquisition of any particular thing, not the triumph over any particular obstacle. Just this. The family assembled. The evening begun. The ordinary miracle of everyone being in the same room at the same time, not because anything requires it, but because this is where they are. This is what Marge is maintaining the house for, so that there is a house to come home to, so that the couch exists in a room that is warm, so that the family has somewhere to land. This is what Bart is always skating back toward, between the adventures and the detentions and the pranks and the chaos, the couch, where his family is, where he is a son and a brother rather than a discipline problem or a comedic obstacle or the category of person that Springfield Elementary has decided he is. This is what Lisa is playing the saxophone toward, in a way she could not articulate but that the music itself communicates. The particular form of belonging that is available to her in that house on Evergreen Terrace, imperfect and loud and frequently ignoring exactly what she most needs it to see, but hers, still hers. And Maggie, watching everything from her place in the family, filing it all away in the extraordinary mind behind the ordinary baby face, waiting for the moment that requires her to be more than she appears to be. Knowing already that the couch and the family and the evening are worth protecting. Knowing what her silence is for. The television shows, whatever it shows, the couch holds them all. Springfield runs its night outside the windows. The plant and the plant's light and the plant's sound and the water that carries what the plant has put into it, moving through the pipes of every house on every street in this impossible town that exists everywhere and nowhere. That is the town everyone grew up in. That is the town America keeps building regardless of what it costs. That is the town that taught us that love is possible inside terrible conditions, that care is possible without sufficient resources, that a family can hold together through an enormous amount of damage, and the holding can be real even if the conditions that produce the damage are never fully addressed. We did not build Springfield to be a warning, though it is a warning. We built it to be a home, and a home is a thing that holds what matters inside it, regardless of what is wrong outside it, regardless of what the water carries and the air holds and the plant puts out. The couch holds them, the evening holds, and whatever is coming next will come. But not tonight. Tonight the loop is running. Tonight the family is together. Tonight is just tonight, and tonight is enough. Sleep well, wherever you are. The show is always here when you come back. And so are they, regardless of what the water carries and the air holds and the plant puts out. The couch holds them, the evening holds, and whatever is coming next will come. But not tonight. Tonight the loop is running. Tonight the family is together. Tonight is just tonight, and tonight is enough. Sleep well, wherever you are. The show is always here when you come back. And so are they,